now because it's a minute past 7. So welcome to the Wokingham Borough Council Planning Committee of the 8th of July. This meeting is being held using the Teams video conferencing system as a result of the current restriction on public meetings. Just a few things I'd like to go through. The planning committee consists of 11 elected members, borough councillors, who are supported and advised tonight by a variety of professional officers. Tonight we have Rachel Lucas, who is a borough solicitor, who is here to give us advice and guidance on any legal aspects. Callum Wernham, who is the Democratic Services Officer and clerk to this meeting. Chris Bowring, the Vice Chairman of the Planning Committee. Myself, Simon Weeks, the Chairman of the Committee. We have Marcia Head, who's the planning team leader. We have Connor Corrigan joining us just for the Cantley application, and we have Judy Kelly for the Highways Development Manager. So we're tonight here we have a number of presentations to go through, and we have 9 of the 11 nominated councillors on the planning committee. 2 have provided apologies. This is a quasi-judicial committee with formal set procedures and conduct, and I would ask everybody to comply with my guidance and instructions on that. Obviously, we don't have people physically present to speak as we would normally do, but all those who wish to make contributions have been able to provide written submissions, which have been circulated to all members of the planning committee in advance of the meeting. Following the planning officer's presentation and the comments of registered speakers, the planning committee members will consider, question and seek clarification on the application we are discussing, and hopefully reach a decision which may or may not agree with the planning officer's recommendation. Finally, a reminder that our role is to determine any valid planning application using prevailing local and national planning policies and guidelines. Our role is not to suggest changes to schemes, whether they are a good idea, whether they're needed, whether they're too costly, or whether they're alternative uses. We are obliged to make our decisions based on what is submitted this evening. So without further ado, we'll get straight on to the meeting. And first, Callum, I know that we have 2 apologies, and that is Councillor Angus Ross and Councillor Gary Cowan.
That's correct. No other, that's correct, Chairman.
And all other 9 members are present. Members, you will have seen the minutes of the last meeting. I would like to ask, firstly, whether there are any suggested changes or amendments to those minutes. Could you please indicate if that is the case? I see no one indicating. In that case, I propose to virtually sign those as a true and accurate record of the last planning committee meeting, and they will actually be physically signed when that is possible. So thank you for that. Declarations of interest. I know at least 1 member has indicated, or 2 members have indicated a possible issue here. Please, could you identify yourselves?
Yes, Andrew Mickleborough, Chair. I declare an interest in application 200893, 15 The Drive, as a member of the early Town Council Planning Committee that made a recommendation on this matter. However, tonight I come to this application with an open mind and no predetermined view, and for this reason would like to ask officers questions, listen to other representations, and to participate in the vote.
That's fine. Thank you, Andrew. Anyone else?
Hi, Chair. It's Calderon here. Yes, I'd just like to declare an interest on the same item, item 5, 200893. This is in my ward, and due to approaches I have received and comments I have made, there may be a perception that I have predetermined my view on this application. As such, I will take no part in either the discussion or the vote on this item tonight. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Carl. Anybody else? Right.
Do I have to say anything about the fact that Winnish Park and Ride is in my ward, but it has nothing to do with me directly?
That's fine. That's fine. You're perfectly entitled to continue and participate in that, Rochelle. Okay.
Can I just check, Simon, on that basis that I don't have to declare an interest in that one? As I'm the executive member for Highwood.
Again, no, that is not an issue. Thank you though for checking. Okay, all right. Now we'll move on to the first application, which is on the notional page 31 of your agenda, and that is an application 200893 15 The Drive. And just to remember that Calderan will not be taking part in the discussion or any decision making on this item. So straight over to the planning officer.
Thank you, Chair. Let me just get this up. I hope it's going to work. Can everyone see?
Yes.
Yeah.
The...
Yes.
Okay. So this is application 200893 at 15 The Drive in Early. The proposed development consists of a first floor side and rear extension and the regularisation of an unauthorised single-storey rear extension. It's presented to committee as it has been listed in the event it is recommended for approval by Councillor Shirley Boyt. She has listed the application because she believes that the extension should have a hipped roof rather than a side-facing gable. She also believes that the extension is too close to the boundary and has raised comments regarding a hipped gable extension and dormer which have already been constructed at the property. This is the site location plan which shows the site and the proposed first floor extensions. The first floor extensions are indicated in red hatching there, and the single story rear extension is the extension to the rear which connects to the garage on the west of the site. As noted in the officer report, the development has recently been carried out of the property in the form of a hipped gable enlargement and rear-facing dormer. The applicant has carried this out under permitted development rights, and therefore this development is not included in this application. While there is no certificate of lawfulness certifying that this development is lawful, and you will see the development in a moment, the legislation does not require the applicant to apply for one if they wish to utilise their permitted development rights. In this case, the dormer and hipped gable enlargement have been assessed, and they do conform to the requirements of permitted development legislation. The single-storey rear extension, which has also been constructed, and you'll also see in a moment, follows a recent application for prior approval for a larger home extension, which was approved. However, the extension which has been constructed does not match that which has been approved, being approximately 0.7 metres taller and 0.5 metres wider, and running across the full width of the scheme. So you can see the dormer extension in the roof, and the hipped gable enlargement resulting in side-facing dormer, which has already been carried out. And on the bottom right image, you can see the rear extension, which has been constructed, and you can see the side elevation on the bottom left image. These are the existing floor plans. So you can see the dormer, which has been constructed on the right. And you can see the single-storey rear extension as well. The right woods image and the middle image show the roof plan. These are the proposed proposed elevations. So compared to the previous plan, you can see the rear extension which protrudes over the existing single-storey extension. And the side extension which comes out from the side of the existing dwelling and leaves a 900mm gap to the side boundary. Obviously, the dormer is being retained on the bottom right image. These are the proposed floor plans. So this is the house as existing. You can see the front of the house in both of these images from slightly different angles. And you can see the hipped gable enlargement which has been carried out on the dormer extension in the right-hand image. This photo shows an image of another dwelling nearby, and both of these dwellings also have side extensions. These images here, I hope they're clear enough for you, show the rear of the dwelling. The rear extension which has been carried out can be seen in the top image and the right-hand image, the single-storey rear extension, and obviously you've got the dormer extension as well. In the bottom left image, you've got a picture towards the neighbouring property. The rear extension is 2 metres longer than recommended in the Borough Design Guide, however only 0.5 metres longer than that approved under the recent prior approval application. Is not considered to result in harmful overbearing or loss of light to the neighbour. So this is the attached neighbour here. So on the right it shows you which neighbour this is, and then on the left you can see into their garden. So to the right of the image on the left is the single-storey rear extension. You can see their patio area there. These photos show the development as clear as is possible from that side of the boundary, with the unattached neighbour. So in the image on the left, the gap between the two dwellings would be, that's where the single-storey extension would go, and you can see the neighbour's conservatory there to the rear. On the right, there are a number of, on the right-hand image, there are a number of side-facing windows at this neighbour, but none of them serve habitable rooms. The chairman has asked me to elaborate a bit further on neighbour comments which I've received. I've already done this in terms of clarifying what aspects of the proposal are part retrospective or unauthorised. Therefore, issues which have been raised regarding overlooking or overbearing impacts from the dormer, which has already been constructed, are not material planning considerations. The change of the hip roof to the gable end has also been carried out under permitted development. Therefore, the gable aspect of the side extension is not a material consideration and is not incongruous in the street scene. As you've seen, there are other properties on the street with side extensions, including side-facing gables. While the distance to the side boundary from the side extension would only be 900 mil as compared to 1 metre as recommended in the Borough Design Guide, this is minimal and would mitigate any potential terracing impacts between the properties. 3 parking spaces are already available at the property, and this is in line with the council's parking standards. While this leads to there being no soft landscaping in the front garden, such hard standing can often be carried out under permitted development, and there are several other examples of fully paved front gardens on the street. We don't believe this substantiates a reason to refuse this application. In conclusion, the proposal would not be harmful to the character of the area. The side-facing dormer have occurred as and rear-facing dormer have occurred as permitted development, and there are other examples of side gables on the street. We therefore recommend the application for approval. In terms of the members' update, there was an error on the first page of the officer report, which is on page 31, which says that the site is within Hurst Ward. It's obviously not, it's within Bullmarsh and Whitegates Ward. 2 additional comments were also received this morning from neighbours which support the proposal, and these are from the 2 adjacent neighbours. Additionally, 1 objection was received yesterday from the rearwards neighbour, which relates to potential terracing impacts on harm to the character of the area when viewed from their property. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Stefan. I'd just like for the committee members just to get absolute clarity on a couple of points.
Yeah.
So the permitted development rights have been used to put the dormer in the 2nd floor rear roof. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And could you do the issue about the gap between properties, because obviously we are keen, that's why we have the guidance, we are keen to maintain a separation between properties to avoid a effect. Our guideline, I believe, and I should stress, I think it is a guideline, recommends a gap of 1,000 mil, and in this case it's 900 mil. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, right. And the other comment I would just like to make is that the rear elevations are I have to say, very mixed and unattractive, with a series of different roof angles and different types of windows. If you look in that bottom right-hand corner, it's a bit of a mismatch. I'm very glad that isn't at the front. Obviously, the front elevations are more in keeping with the street scene. Okay, could I ask members to turn on your agendas to the first of the plans on page that are adjacent to page 38 in your agendas. And Stefan, I just want to get absolute clarity. Do members have that now? Hopefully. If we look at the red line area, we understand that there is a correspondence indicating support from what I'll refer to as the other half of the semi-detached house. So that's number 17. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. And number 13, which is the other immediate neighbour, has written saying they have no objections.
Yes.
And the principal nearest objection is from the resident of 6 Chiltern Crescent, who obviously has a view of that not particularly attractive series of rear extensions. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you for that. Okay, members, I'll throw it over to you. And as I say, I'm going to go round in alphabetical order for the members that are present. I'll go first to Councillor Chris Bowring. Chris, would you like to make any points or raise any questions? Okay, fine. In that case, we move on to Stephen Conway.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I have a number of questions I'd like to ask about this application. It does appear on the face of it that there is, in some senses, an improvement if you compare the existing side elevation as from number 13, the neighbour at number 13, with the current, in the sense there's a reduction in fenestration. But unfortunately, that is, as I can see it, is replaced by a very big mass of brickwork and roofing. And I was wondering, my first question really is to Stefan, asking whether you think that kind of bulk and massing is appropriate. Because it does seem, even though there's been no objection from the residents at number 13, it is a pretty imposing looking scale of brickwork and roofing that they're going to be looking out on. I mean, I have to say, at all points, or rather at many points, the applicant seems to be just slightly getting away with it. We're saying, or your report is saying, you're prepared to condone the infringement of the Borough Design Guide because it's very minor. I can understand that. But we've already seen evidence, unfortunately, that the applicant has built the first floor extension that's longer than it should have been, even with the permission given, it's longer than that, and that permission is longer than our design guide suggests it should be. So my overall impression...
Am I alone in hearing a huge amount of background noise?
No, you're not.
No, I think I'm afraid it is my computer that's temporarily struggling with the quantity of information it's trying to absorb, but I think it'll calm down in a moment. So I'm hoping that you will...
struggling to hear.
I think you'll find that the noise is giving way now. Yes?
Better.
Can you hear me better? Thank you. Well, what I was going to say was my overall impression of this is that it starts to look perilously close to an overdevelopment of the site. There's an awful lot of built form here that's crammed in, and I'm not very comfortable with with approving the application as things stand at present. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Stephen. We now come on to Pauline Jorgensen. Pauline, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I've got a question actually. I wonder if Stephen could just remind me. I mean, I agree with the other Stephen. I'm not happy with this as a house as it is at the moment in terms of the new plans. But could you just remind me what's actually changed, what we're actually looking for approval for? Because I got a bit confused when you described it.
Yes, the application relates to. Let me go back to the slide. So it relates to the side in the. I assume you can still see the presentation. In the top
cursor to show us.
Can you see my cursor moving right now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So this side extension here. This rear extension here.
Sorry, could you just do that again? I can't see your cursor.
Yeah, that's fine. This in the bottom right plan, this side and rear extension here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the side elevation, so it encompasses this area here.
Yeah.
And in addition, this side extension here.
Okay, so it's got
sorry, this rear extension, sorry.
Okay.
Rear extension, yeah. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And Stefan, sorry, Stefan, could you just confirm that the first floor extension, which from the front is appears to be over the garage, because of the ridge line is dropped, that will be considered sufficiently subservient to the main part of the dwelling. Is that right?
Yes, it's considered subservient. Yes.
Carry on, Pauline.
And it was just a very, very minor point. I've got a typo for you on the description, but I'll email you that.
Right. Okay.
Thank you, Abdul Lois.
Thank you, Chairman. I did have a question, but I think you've answered on your starting point on page 36, paragraph 9. And for time being, I'm okay. There was a question from me regarding 900 million, 1,000, but I think you've answered that question, so I'll hold it for time being. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Andrew Mickleborough.
Yes, Chair. I have questions around three themes. A moment ago, the matter of extensions, that extensions should usually be subservient to the host dwelling was raised. My first question is, how is host dwelling defined? Now, this home has been subject to a number of large extensions. So the original host dwelling is considerably smaller than the dwelling on site today. There are a number of homes nearby that have not been subject to extensions. When looking at the size and bulk of 15 The Drive, could an argument be made that this should be in relation to the original building and nearby properties that have not been extended? And if so, that the further extension is not really subservient at all? My second question is around the theme of terracing effects. A number of residents have raised concerns about terracing effects. Can officers firstly confirm that terracing effect is a material consideration? If so, then most observers would undoubtedly agree with those residents who believe that a hipped rather than a gabled roof would lessen the terracing effect. Also, can officers confirm that whilst there are a very small number of homes in the area with a gabled roof, almost all have hipped roofs? And if there have been applications for gabled roof conversions in nearby roads, that were rejected because they were not in character? And finally, could officers please comment on two issues relating to item 13 on page 36? First, as has already been mentioned, the Borough Design Guide recommends, and I appreciate this as a recommendation, a gap of 1 metre be maintained between development and side boundaries. It's commented that the 900 mil proposed gap is only, quote, marginally short of this requirement. Another way of looking at this is that it's 10% short. At what point does this become unacceptable? For instance, would 850 mils or 800 mils be considered unacceptable? And on the same page, the 45-degree line would intersect the conservatory. Would officers please explain the line of reasoning that because the conservatory is made of glass, resulting loss of light would be modest. I would have thought that people who build conservatories would want to have a reasonable expectation that they will continue to be flooded with as much light as possible. Thank you.
Okay, right, Stefan, can you have a stab at those? It's, I think I've got that down as the subservient to the current or subservient to the original,
Yeah.
HIPT versus conventional, and the issues regarding the 45-degree impact on a neighbour's conservatory, when bearing in mind, my understanding is that neighbour has raised no objections.
Yes, so in terms of the host dwelling, we do look at the extensions which have been carried out as a whole, obviously, because that otherwise it could result in an incremental increase, which is no longer subservient. However, if you're looking at this from the front, the majority of what's going to be seen is that first floor side extension, which is above an existing garage. It is set down and it is set back from the front by 1 metre, which is in accordance with the guidance in the Borough Design Guide. I'll combine that then with the question relating to the 1 metre gap. Again, we do need to note that that is guidance, and what in terms of the terracing effect, what we're looking for is something that is sufficient to mitigate the terracing impact, and it is considered that 900 millimeters is sufficient to mitigate a potential terracing impact. It is potential, remember, because the neighbours don't have a side extension at the moment. So, and considering the street scene, where there are other, and these are probably, in all likelihood, these are historic applications. There are examples of dwellings with side extensions that go all the way to the boundary. So that is a established part of the character of the area. In terms of the hipped roof, what needs to be remembered is that the existing house now has a gabled roof, and that's carried out under permitted development rights and is now a relatively common feature. And you can see that, I don't know if it was permitted development at the neighbouring property, but you can see a gable end at the neighbouring property. So in our view, in officers' view, to put a hipped roof on the side extension would potentially be discordant with the existing roof, which is permitted development. So if you were to put a hipped roof on the extension, that would obviously conflict with the reality that the roof is now gabled. So you'd have a mixture of roof forms then. In terms of the conservatory, while there would be a marginal loss of light in terms of the 45-degree line to the neighbour's conservatory, what has to be remembered is that we're talking about whether there is to be significant harm to the neighbour's amenity, which would justify the refusal of the application. The conservatory, while people would expect a significant amount of light to reach their conservatory, the reality of the infringement would be minimal because there is light is available from all sides of the conservatory, including through the roof. Additionally, whether or not the conservatory constitutes a habitable room, it doesn't constitute a habitable room either. So it wouldn't substantiate a reason to refuse the application. Right, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Could we just also just check that there's a point we mustn't lose sight of, is that the questions about the conservatory, we do have a commentary from that neighbour saying they don't have any objections. That is correct, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. And also, I do take your point about whilst bearing in mind what I said at the introduction to this evening's committee, that our job is not to propose a redesign of the property, it's to comply, or is to consider and either agree or reject what is in front of us. I do take your point quite seriously that having a building with one half hipped and the other half conventional would be rather unbalanced and would probably have an unbalancing effect on it. Clearly, the impact is much greater from the rear. The other thing is just, I think we need to just get absolute clarity on is, of course, the reference is to a 900mm gap with the boundary, but of course, as you see from the first of the site plan that we looked at, the actual gap between the proposed extension and the neighbour is considerably more than that, because obviously they, by the look of it, they have the width of a driveway currently between the side of their house and number 15. Okay, if we could just move on then, Malcolm Richards.
Thank you, Chairman. It is a fairly large house with quite a bit of extension put on at different times. The back doesn't look great, I must admit, but from the front I don't see too much of a problem. It matches the rest of the street scene generally. I had thought about the hip thing, but it's quite true that if you stick a hipped...
I think we've lost you, Malcolm.
He lost his microphone again.
Hello, are you still there?
Yep.
Oh,
go
right.
ahead.
I don't know what happened. It just disappears now and then. Yes, it's a fairly large extension. It doesn't look wonderful from the back, but it isn't hideous. From the front and generally the side, it's okay, and it seems to be in matching enough with the street scene. There are minor indiscretions in terms of lengths and angles of different places, and when they applied for permission. So they're occasionally slightly naughty in that respect, but it also says in the officer's report that none of these are serious enough to warrant refusal. Parking spaces are okay. With regard to the gap between the properties being 900 instead of 1,000, that's less than 4 inches. I'm guessing that it's a metre now, which is 40 inches, and an old-fashioned yard, which is what I believe the gap used to be, was 36 inches. So it's just 4 inches difference on it, which I don't think most people would notice. So the gaps around the house are okay. It fits in with the character. It doesn't look wonderful at the back, but overall I don't think it's a major problem, and on balance I would be approving this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rochelle Shepherd-Dubay.
Looking at page 39 and looking at the rest of the massive extensions on most of the other houses on this street, and some of them are even larger than that, I can't see any reason for objecting to it. And as other people have said, the driveway seems to be separating 15 and 13. And if 17 doesn't object to having any kind of shading, there's no reason for us to bring an objection if they don't care. On balance, I believe that I do agree about the roof types. Having 2 different roof types would make it look more incongruous than anything else. I think on balance, I believe that we should approve it, and I would probably vote to approve it. Okay,
thank you. Finally, we'll try returning to Councillor Chris Bowring.
Yes, good evening. Apologies, my microphone obviously wasn't working at the beginning. I was trying to declare an interest. Having missed the officer presentation and quite a lot of the debate, I think I will abstain on this item, Chairman.
Right. Okay. Now, do any other members, well, firstly, does any member wish to put forward an alternative proposal to the officer's recommendation?
Simon, I don't wish to put forward an alternative proposal, but I would just like to ask one more question, if I may, that came up as a result of Stefan's answers to various other questions. I was slightly puzzled by why Stefan believed the conservatory shouldn't be designated as a habitable room. I mean, a lot of people spend a lot of time in conservatories, so I'm just slightly puzzled by that belief that it's not a habitable room. Could he just clarify or explain to me why that would be so?
Stefan?
Yes, the conservatory, I've applied less weight to the harm of the conservatory, as you may spend a lot of time in there, but obviously that is likely to be curtailed, for example, in the winter, as opposed to something like a living room, which would be your habitable space across the whole of the year. So it's considered a less high quality habitable space. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, all right. Stephen, does that give you the answer?
Well, it's certainly an answer. I'm not entirely convinced by it, but I accept it. Thank you.
Okay, so I will just ask once again, does anybody wish to put forward an alternative proposal for the committee to consider against the current recommendation of the officers to approve?
Chairman, do you just want to mention the submissions that were received for this application that have been considered by members just before we go to the vote?
Yeah, well, yes, my apologies for that. We received submissions from ASA, Local Residents Group. We also received that there was the speaking submissions, and we obviously, of course, had a submission from Councillor Shirley Boyd, who's the local ward member who has listed this application. I think those were the two key ones, I believe.
That's correct.
Then there were some communications in support and objecting. I think in equal numbers, 2 of each, if I recall correctly. Okay. Sorry, Stefan, could you take the slides down now, please?
Yes, I will.
Okay, thank you. So on the basis that we have discussed this and had a series of questions answered, we will now, with no alternative proposal being put forward, we will now go to the officer's recommendation, which is a recommendation we have here in conjunction, of course, with any of the comments in the members' update as well. But I would just confirm that the following members will not be voting on this. Councillor Bowring, because he's had an incomplete part of the presentation due to technical issues. Councillor Duran, because he's declared an interest. And I think that's it. So I will just now go through and ask those remaining members whether they are willing to support this recommendation. So I'll come to you first, Stephen Conway.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to abstain on this application.
Okay, thank you. Pauline Jorgensen.
Much as I don't like it, I think I will be voting in favour.
Okay, thank you. Abdul Lois.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be supporting this application as officers recommended. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Andrew Mickleborough.
I would support refusal.
Well, so you're not supporting the recommendation because we're not considering a.
Sorry,
okay.
no.
Fine, thank you. Malcolm Richards.
I would approve of this. I will be supporting it.
Thank you. Councillor Rochelle Shepherd-Debay.
On balance, I think I'm supporting this. Unfortunately, it's not the best application, but on balance, I think we should approve it.
Okay, so in that case, I'm also casting my vote in favour of support. In that case, I've got 6, I think it's 6, 1, 2, 3, yeah, 6 members of the committee voting to support. Sorry, 5 members of the committee voting to support. Councillor Conway abstaining and Councillor Mickleborough not voting to support. So on that basis, this application is approved. Thank you, Stefan. And we now move on to the next application, which is on page 55, which Planning Officer Stefan Fludger is also handling. I'll go straight back over to you, Stefan.
Thank you, Chair. One moment. Okay, let's get. Okay, can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, I can see it.
So this is application 200888. The proposed development consists of the erection of 3 new business units at Lambs Farm Business Park in Swallowfield. It's presented to the committee as it has been listed in the event it is recommended for approval by Councillor Stuart Munro, as he believes that this proposal encroaches into the countryside. This is the site location plan, which shows the site and shows the site within Lambs Farm Business Park. So this is Lambs Farm Business Park here. The buildings would be located at the southern end down here. This is an aerial image of the application, with the application site shown with the red line. The area in question is currently used for HGV parking. This is the proposed block plan. So these buildings here are these buildings here, just for a sense of perspective. And the new units are proposed here. So it's 2 buildings which are attached together with 1 unit here and 2 units here. As you can see, the buildings would be adjacent to the existing buildings. This plan also shows that the site will still accommodate HGVs, and these tracking drawings show that the HGVs will be able to get in and out of the site in the access here, and then they'll be able to park here. These are the proposed elevations, which are similar to, well, they're very similar to the existing buildings on the site. These are the proposed floor plans. So in terms of photos, I've tried to give you the best perspective possible. There are a number of photos here. So these photos are of the existing HGV parking area, and I may skip back to the site plan to show you where they're taken from. So these are taken from here, facing across the site here. These photos are again of the HGV parking area. The bottom left photo is taken from within the site back towards the existing buildings. The right-hand photo is taken from the eastern side of the site in the opposite direction from the left-hand photo. And then the top photo is similar to the previous ones. These photos, obviously the bottom left photo is again back towards the existing building, and the top 2 photos are from the site eastwards towards Basingstoke Road, on the surrounding fields over the fence boundary. So they are taken from here,
yep,
facing this direction. These photos are facing southwards from the existing HGV parking area towards the adjacent paddock and stables. And so you can see the hedgerow that bounds the site. Well, it doesn't bound the site, but it bounds the edge of the paddock. So these are taken from here,
looking south,
looking this direction and this direction. And then this last photo is from the paddock back towards the existing buildings. The proposal results in development in the countryside. However, this would be on land which has already been hard surfaced and therefore results in the intensification of the use of the site rather than expansion further into the countryside. Additionally, as has been stated in the officer report, the buildings would be viewed against the backdrop of the existing business units. The highways officer has indicated that there would be no adverse highway impacts as a result of the proposal, and issues raised by neighbours regarding drainage have been addressed by condition. Going on to conditions, in terms of the members' update, a condition has been omitted from the officer report which should have been included. A travel plan was submitted by the applicant, but was not considered of sufficient standard by the highways officer because of these reasons. The travel plan is required to make the development acceptable. However, it can be remedied through the use of a condition requiring a new travel plan, an updated one, which relates to the site as a whole. Such a travel plan has been dealt with at other applications on the site, so it'd be an updated version of this. So it's therefore recommended for approval subject to this additional condition, which requires a new travel plan prior to occupation of the building. And that's everything. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. I think we just draw members' attention to the fact that, as we've seen from these slides, it is a rural area, but the proposed site of this development is, I think we'd agree, is fairly industrial because it's completely hard surfaced, having previously got permission for HGV parking. Clearly, on the slide that is currently on the screen, you can see an HGV park there, and I guess whether it's an HGV or whether it's a building that's there, it is quite a hard edge to the countryside, but it is within a currently defined, it is within the red line of the site. So it's not, if you like, extending the site further into the countryside. It's simply, as I think the officer indicated, is an intensification of use of the existing site. Now, this application has raised objections, which you will have read from the parish council, from the local ward member, and from a dozen neighbours. And we've also had, of course, representations from the applicant, as well as input in terms of the final consideration. So I'm going to go around members again, but this time I'm going to go around in reverse order to see whether we have any issues that people would like to get clarification on. So I'll first come to Councillor Chris Bowring. Councillor Bowring, can you join us?
Yes, apologies. I just wondered, could I do my declaration of interest at this point or later?
Well, when you get to the relevant item.
Okay, that's fine. I just had a couple of points on page 69 where it talks about use of previously developed land. And I know there is planning permission for the HGVs, but I wonder whether that's quite in the spirit in using that it's previously developed land when it was not in terms of structure, but in terms of HGVs. Okay. And the second point was I wasn't entirely convinced that this was actually genuine development. I think we need to show not just that there's an increase in the number of buildings, an expansion, physical expansion, but an actual expansion of the business itself to comply with paragraph 17 on page 70. So those are my 2 points. Thank you.
Okay, Stefan, so could you address those points as to whether we should regard it as previously used land, and also the matter on paragraph 17 on page 70?
Yes. So it is a point that the land is previously it has been recently previously developed, and we have approved that, but we need to read the issue with regards to the previously developed land in conjunction with the support that the MPPF gives to expansions of all types of businesses in the countryside, which I think was the second point that you were getting at there, Chris. Correct me if I'm wrong. The land, while it doesn't have a building on it, I've been advised by the planning policy officer that we can consider it previously developed land. I think the fact that it's been recently developed is a moot point. And obviously the MPPF does support expansion of all businesses in the countryside, so that provides quite significant support for the proposal. In terms of the, I think you mentioned the need for the expansion of the business. There have been a number of applications at the site recently, which have shown a need to expand the business. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I was referring to not just the physical expansion, but the capacity of the business itself.
Yes, so obviously this would lead to an expansion in the capacity of the business itself. The units are used for various purposes, and they're rented by different companies that wish to use them.
And one assumes that they would not be investing in additional buildings unless there was a demand for them. Members, I would draw your attention to pages 58 and 62, sorry, 58 to 62 of your agenda, where you'll see a very long list of applications on this site, which clearly indicate that right back since 2012, there's been significant expansion on this previous site of this engineering business that was originally there. Okay, we could now come on to Stephen Conway.
Thank you, Chairman. I was going to ask actually my second question. The second question that Chris Barron asked was something I was going to ask. On balance, I actually think it's very difficult to argue that this encroaches on the countryside, in the sense that we've got hard standing for the heavy goods vehicles, and the image in front of us now on the screen shows that really the beyond that fence and new hedging, we've got part of Business Park site. So it'd be very difficult to argue, I think, that putting some buildings there instead of the HGVs constitutes encroachment on the countryside. So although I was a little bit concerned about paragraph 17 on page 70 and whether this could be justified under those terms, I've heard Stefan's answer, so I'm now pretty prepared to support this application.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Carl Duran.
Thank you, Chair. Right. I've got one question here, but it's just got a bit of setting up. There's a lot of planning history here, as you mentioned. In the last 5 years, there's been applications to erect business units that have been both approved and refused, and also dismissed at appeal. This application relies on the fact, as we've just been discussing, that this land has already been developed by being turned into a HGV parking area. And I noticed the report mentions that. And provision for that change of use was approved in December 2018. But there was a previous application to that one a year before, pretty much in the same vein. And all the comments and objections on both those applications and this one are all of a similar vein, you know, the continued expansion and encroachment of this business park into the countryside. Now, that first application was for a retrospective change of use, 172291. Basically, the site that you're looking at there had already been tarmacked. In fact, the photo we're looking at there, the grass in front of you was also tarmacked. That was changed for the second one. And that was refused. And quoting from the reasons for refusal, inappropriate form of development that is unacceptable in principle in this countryside location, urbanisation of the countryside, encroachment into the open countryside beyond the historic boundary of the business park, and this retrospective development unacceptably harms the openness and character of the countryside and the intrinsic value inherent within it. Now, that's a car park. We're not talking about buildings here, we're talking about a car park, or a park for HGVs. And the recommendation in that was not only to refuse, but to enforce, which is written quite clearly. So my question is that in 2017, laying tarmac here on this site was considered unacceptable harm and encroachment on the countryside. And in 2018, it was allowed and it had become completely acceptable. And therefore, that has made this development in many ways acceptable. So what changed?
Okay, fair point. Stefan?
So from my knowledge of the history of the site, yes, this area in this photo, the area to the foreground, was also HGV parking, which was unauthorized, and this whole area, including the area where the buildings are now proposed, was unauthorized HGV parking. The applicant submitted an application for the whole area, including the area to the foreground, as HGV parking. My understanding of the planning history was that they then submitted another application, but agreed to remove this whole area to the foreground and return it to grass, which is what has been carried out, as you can see from the picture. So the reduced amount of HGV parking was considered acceptable, with the requirement, and it was a condition of that application that the land was returned to paddock, which has obviously been carried out, and the reduced amount of HGV parking was considered acceptable. The current application obviously does propose buildings on that land which we have approved to be for HGV parking, but under the assessment of this application now and what's before us, the situation was regularized, and obviously we accepted the HGV parking and the development in that location, and which applies to this area where the buildings are proposed. So that's the situation that's where we now are. So yes, that is the history. But they have complied with the requirement to return. I don't know the exact proportion of what was laid to hard standing back to paddock, but it's probably approximately half of it, and they have carried that out. So we now have to assess, obviously, this application in light of the situation now, and on its own merits.
Okay, thank you, Stefan.
Can I just add something, please?
Yes, sure.
The other thing that changed between 2017 and 2018 is the MPPF was updated and
That's what I was angling for.
And contained a much more favourable presumption to enable business development generally. So that was another reason why the 2018 application was allowed.
So in essence, the guidelines we were working within were, if you like, relaxed by central government between the original refusal and then the subsequent approval.
Yes, the policy changed.
Carl?
Thank you. That's actually written in the decision notice of that application, which is why I was angling for that to be said. The government changed the rules, basically. Not to get too political on it. So the only other thing I want to say is that I do regard this as unreasonable, really, and it is encroaching on the countryside. I think we shouldn't have done it in the first place. I think we made a mistake by letting them have the HGV parking, but we're working to an MPPF that's been changed. Just for interest, the fence in the picture as well used to be like the hedge on the right-hand side of the picture. That was all ripped up to create that in the first place. Okay, I'm probably going to vote against this.
All right, thank you, Carl. But before we just go on to the other members of the committee, could I just ask members to turn to page 81 on their physical agenda, where the site plan is. You'll see that the red line area in the bottom right corner of the site. Just a couple of questions. I mean, what would we now regard where that newly planted hedge runs, which is obviously the the southernmost horizontal red line on the map. Would we regard that as absolutely the limit of the current business park?
I mean, we obviously always have to assess each application on its own merits, so I can't speak for potential future applications. But
well, let me help you there. For example, am I correct in saying that if we look at the access road running centrally through north-south, which is enclosed within the red line, am I right that they tried to get a development to the west of that red line?
Yes, they did. So
that was refused, wasn't it?
Yes, so I think Carl has referred to this earlier. There was a dismissed appeal, so we refused a new business unit to the west of that red line out into the open fields to the west, and that was dismissed by the inspector in terms of being encroachment into the countryside. Yes, we do have limits which are especially mentioned by that inspector, so that's a useful appeal decision.
So what I'm really looking at is, are we really saying that the current site as we see it here is probably the current limit of which obviously the council would have to consider any new application on its merit, but the current site limit is quite well now defined by the area to the north, which is abuts Lambs Lane farmhouse, and obviously the southernmost red line that we're looking at, the access road to the west, and the boundary with the open country to the east. So the site is quite now constrained in terms of future development, and I would imagine that any future application to extend those boundaries would be probably met with greater concern.
It is obvious, it's a consideration, obviously.
Okay. All right, thank you. Can I now come on to Pauline Jorgensen?
Thank you, Chairman. That conversation about the parking was very useful because I was equally confused about what was previously approved and when with the two conflicting planning applications. Turning to this, if I understand it correctly, all we're doing in essence is replacing vehicle parking with buildings. Is that right?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. So on that basis, a couple of questions about conditions. Can we condition that the travel plan must be submitted before the development starts?
I think all conditions would need to. Would I be right, Marcia, in saying that all conditions will need to be discharged before they start?
I've had previous experience where it hasn't happened with schools.
I'm just quickly reading the conditions in the beginning of the report.
And there's the additional one on the screen, Marcia, as well.
Yeah.
Here it refers to occupation rather than construction, doesn't it?
Yes.
Well, I'd like to see it before construction.
My suggestion is that the current wording of occupation would probably be considered all right, because if this company wants to invest, presumably a not inconsiderable amount of money in building these new buildings, they will want to get tenants in there quickly to recover some of their investment, and therefore they will need to get that that travel plan accepted by the council prior to the first people moving in. So I think we have quite a bit of influence and leverage there on that. Would you accept that, Ian?
I've just got
the condition needs to be proportionate and reasonable.
I've got experience where travel plans were required and weren't produced, and then it became a conversation about, we've got this building, we're about to occupy it, you can't stop us. So that's why I'd like to see the travel plan before development.
If this application is approved this evening, we could certainly get on to the applicant tomorrow and say, the committee are concerned, can you please start work on your travel plan? We'd like to see it as soon as possible. But as Stefan said, conditions do have to be reasonable and proportionate. And we have to look at harm is only caused once the building is occupied. So it would seem a bit onerous to require the travel plan to be approved before any development takes place. And
we're trying to encourage them to do it earlier rather than putting us in a cleft stick later. So yeah, thank you. If you could do that, that would be good. The other thing I was a little bit concerned about was recent plans where we've ended up with rather more caravans on sites than we anticipated. Is it possible to condition this so that they can't use the site for caravans and change the use of the buildings significantly?
I think it's very challenging for us to condition as to what might happen in the future, and I think the enforcement process would give us sufficient clout in order to be able to prevent anything happening without the benefit of the appropriate planning permission. Otherwise, we're trying to condition unknown events in the future, which frankly would not be comprehensive or all-encompassing.
So the reason I'm mentioning that is the example I'm thinking of. We ended up with extra caravans that we weren't expecting, and then we were told that that couldn't be refused because they already had permission. I just want to make sure that we don't have that position again.
I'm not sure of the relevance of caravans versus industrial units. I don't make that connection.
It's an open question.
Okay. Did you want an officer response to that, Pauline?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Officers,
I
please.
can. In my view, this is quite a prestigious, very well maintained business park, and we have to think what are the chances of the landowner allowing caravans to move onto this site, and how would his existing business tenants feel about that? It seems to me unlikely that that's going to happen, and I think the site that you're talking about was a disused, poorly maintained site in Early where that has happened. I don't think there's much chance of that happening here.
Okay, so it's not possible?
I think the right response, Pauline, is it will be inadvisable and probably considered inappropriate by an inspector, because don't forget, somebody can challenge conditions as well as an overall decision.
Okay, thank you.
All right, okay. Come on to Abdul Lois.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, I'm just looking at the notes I made. Okay, page 64, the neighbor's objection. The original area of the site was 0.75 hectares, but the total floor space on the site is now 3750 meters square. How this came about, can you please, Stefan, if you could explain to me a bit about it? And also the second paragraph says, in the period of 2012 to 2016, around 2,300 square meter has been created for business unit. If you could please explain to me how this square floor space came along.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So it's first important to note that these comments, these bullet points refer to comments which have been made by neighbours. So they are not, they are calculations which have been made by neighbours. So they're not calculations that have been made by officers. But how that has come about, there has been expansion on the site, as you've seen, and Simon has mentioned the significant history. Each of those applications has been assessed on its own merits, and I don't, on the top of my head, know the reasons for the decision of every single one of those, but it's largely the site used to be a carriage museum, and there were a cluster of buildings on the site, and just each of those applications has been considered acceptable on its own merits, and it hasn't been considered harmful to the countryside. But I can't give you an answer for every single one of those applications, but there has been an expansion of buildings on the site. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Now, Andrew Mickleborough.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to begin by drilling down a little bit more into matters relating to parking. The plans on page 84 indicate a considerable loss of parking and turning space, with 3 remaining HGV parking spaces. Can officers confirm 3 matters? Firstly, that it has been and would, if this application was approved, be unusual for there to be more than 3 HGVs parked on site at any one time. The reason why I ask this is that there is a reference on page 68 to, quote, could at any point be reasonably home to many large HGVs. And we've also seen photographs tonight that have shown that the applicants have used in the past a neighbouring field also for HGV parking. Secondly, relating to parking, could officers please show us the exact tracking that would enable the HGVs to safely turn? Specifically, would they have to reverse all the way back past where the entrance road reaches the commercial buildings? Or is there sufficient space remaining for them to be able to turn in front of the proposed new buildings? And thirdly, again, in relation to parking and traffic, could officers please give some information about the width of the access road, and specifically whether it's sufficient for 2 HGVs to safely pass one another? I wonder if this could become more significant safety issue if the additional buildings led to an increase in HGV traffic on the access road. And my second set of questions, and much shorter, is that I am concerned that residences in a primary school are located close to the entrance to the site. Can officers please confirm what is happening to the volume of traffic using this road? Specifically, is there any indication that traffic volumes are increasing, especially at peak times? What the current speed limit is, and whether there's any KSI data that can be shared this evening with us for this stretch of road? Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Andrew, on the issue about turning and tracking, I would refer you to the last of the A3 plans for this, which do quite clearly show the tracking and turning for articulated vehicles. For some strange reason in my agenda, that particular thing is at the very end of the, rather than just before the end. So I don't know whether you possibly missed that when you went through your agenda. But in the meantime, I don't know whether Stefan or Judy, whether you're going to take these issues, which they're obviously mainly related to traffic, parking, turning, and highway safety.
Judy, are you able to cover that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you wanted to make a start, I was just going to check the KSI data. I need to look at that on a separate website, if that's all right.
Okay. Yep. Go ahead, Stefan.
Yeah, so I can answer the question in relation to the width of the access. The access for the site is very long, as you can see from this image, and it is not at points wide enough for 2 HGVs to park. However, that pass one another. Sorry. However, that's an existing issue on the site. And this application is not for the HGV parking. I don't know whether that, I can't comment on whether that's a safety issue, and it's a separate issue. The issue in relation to, so you've touched on, there will obviously be a loss of HGV parking as a result of this application. The HGV parking at present is used, as far as I understand it, for a number of businesses across the site, as and when needed. However, when consulting with the highways officer, they haven't raised an objection to the loss of the HGV parking as a result of this scheme. And obviously, we've shown that from the tracking drawing that the HGVs are able to get in and out of the site while turning.
Okay.
I don't know if Judy has got the information she needs yet.
Before we get there, could I just clarify then that you've indicated the current position is that lorries couldn't necessarily pass easily on the access road. This isn't a public highway, it's private land, and presumably any difficulties or congestion that creates on the site is a matter for the site owners and their tenants to resolve, not for us, I guess.
Well, yes, and it's unrelated to this application as well, because we're obviously looking at an application for 3 business units, and whether it's been demonstrated that the lorries can get in and out of the remaining HGV car park, which is affected by this application. But in terms of the entrance to the business park itself is some distance from the units, and it's an existing situation. Okay,
Judy, are you able to talk about school and KSIs?
Yeah, so in terms of traffic volume, it's relatively small amount of additional commercial floor space. So in terms of the likely trip generation from that, it's about a total of 8 additional movements in the AM peak hour and 7 in the PM peak hour. So that's the total of trips in and out of the site. So it's really quite minimal in terms of impact on the surrounding highway network. Most of the traffic is likely when it comes out onto back lane to be turning right towards the B road rather than turning left to go past the school as well. In terms of the speed limit, it's a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit on the road, and in terms of accident history, there's just one slight accident that's been recorded in the last 5 years, but that's further along to the west of the site access. I think that's pretty much all the answers. Hopefully that's all the questions answered.
And could I just check that when you say about eight traffic movements peak AM and 7 peak PM, these are these likely to be mixed movements? Because obviously the nature of this building is that there could be people working in them, but similarly there could be HGVs delivering or collecting from them. So when we say 8 and 7 there, for example, is that likely to be a mixture of HGVs visiting or collecting from the site, as well as staff leaving and entering the site to work there?
So that would be the sort of car and van trip rates. HGVs will be quite minimal. I haven't got those figures to hand, but it's likely to be in the order of sort of 1 movement, 1 HGV. I can look that up in terms of the trip rates if you'd like, but it generally is that low compared with the in proportion to the car and the van trips.
Okay. Thank you. Andrew, would you like to come back?
Yes, please. Thank you. And whilst we have on the screen the block plan that shows the tracking, which I did look at in my my document pack, I'd still like to seek confirmation that if there are 3 HGVs parked in front of the 3 new units, will they be able to turn in the remaining space in front of those units, or are they going to have to reverse back out to a turning space towards the top of that plan? It seems to me that the space that's remaining is fair for turning is fairly limited.
Yeah, so I think that this block plan shows that the HGV manoeuvring can take place around the proposed parking bays, but I don't believe this is the final approved parking layout plan. Is that correct, Stefan? That the parking bays on the left-hand side have actually been relocated elsewhere, which gives more space for the HGV manoeuvring in this area. Is that right?
No, they those parking spaces, are you talking about the ones that are listed V1 to 8?
Yeah, so
on the tracking drawing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
as far as I understand the plans, they are not being removed. No. There is another parking plan, but that refers to just the parking for the units specifically, and it just emits those van parking spaces, but that it's not my understanding that the van parking spaces would be removed.
Okay, that's fine. I wasn't quite sure of the difference between the two plans. So I think basically the HGV tracking is what is shown on the plan at the moment. You could of course try to do a tracking exercise where the HGVs, turn in a sort of 5-point turn or a 7-point turn, or clearly Arctic vehicles can turn, a lot more easily than rigid ones. But I mean, and this is the tracking exercise that the applicant carried out to demonstrate that it works. It's all within the the privately owned business park. There's certainly no impact on the highway or risk of HGVs, having to reverse all the way back onto the highway.
Andrew, any further points?
No, thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Moving on. Malcolm Richards.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. 2 or 3 comments and questions here. I've just counted them up. In the last 8 years, since 2012, they've had 23 applications to change or expand this site. It does seem to be a fairly regular thing, and it either builds something different on top of what's there, or it expands further. It seems to be a fairly insidious expansion of something in the countryside. I'd like to maintain as much of the countryside as we can, unless there's good cause. If we're building things there that will attract employment, that's always a good thing. And that then leads me on to ask, these 3 units, do we know what they're going to be? Are they going to be mostly office space or storage warehouses with one small office? Do we know what it's likely to be used for, as to whether it attracts extra people for employment?
Well, I think B1 and B8 categories are fairly broad and cover office space as well as, I think, storage, isn't it? Stefan, could you elaborate, please?
I can, yes. So the application is for, yes, so it's for B1A, B and C
Can you
with
remind me what
storage.
those codes stand for, please?
I can. So B1A is offices, B1B is research and development of products or processes, and B1C are industrial processes, but that's generally light industrial processes, as opposed to B2, which is general industrial, and B8 is storage or distribution. Those uses are in line with, off the top of my head, without checking every every one of these permissions, a lot of the business park is in the same use. Certainly all the applications I've dealt with at the site have been for the same uses.
Okay. Well, my comments there are, if there's a lot of office space there, unless that office space is related to the industries that are already there, then it is just more office space. And from what I read and see, we have quite a lot of office space in and around Woking at the moment, to the extent that many of office spaces are being converted to accommodation, to residential instead. So putting more office space, if it's just office, doesn't seem to be worthwhile developing within the countryside for that, especially since we've seen that with COVID-19, the majority of people now, if they're only office jobs, are done at home. So if it is predominantly going to be used for office, I don't see a benefit in destroying a bit of the countryside facility for that. If it was sort of manufacturing,
Malcolm,
sorry, yeah,
I do need to just interrupt you there. We have already discussed this at some length. The proposed additional buildings are on existing approved HGV parking. It is not intruding further into the countryside.
Correct,
So I
but
think
it's
you need
changing
to
it
be a little
into
bit careful.
buildings as opposed to flat surfaces, which means it looks more, it's a larger scale than just a flat car park for lorries. And if they have a lot of lorries, I'm not sure where the lorries will go if that space is removed for parking them. So it's a question of what the space is being used for, whether it's likely to create employment, what happens if you build on that area and the lorries need to go somewhere else. So those are some of my concerns. The other one is just this practicality again about the road layout. It looks like there's sort of two circles going in an upside down Y. The thing is, if you want to do that, if you come in from the top line and reverse into the other branch of it, there isn't a road connecting it to allow you to go out forward. I don't see how you can turn the lorry round on that arrangement unless you have either a lot more road space on the edge or a third connecting circle. With a Y, you can't drive down one Y and then back down the other unless there's a way of curving on it. So I'm not sure that road layout would enable lorries to turn and come out in a forward-facing direction. It looks like they have to come out, as far as I can imagine, in a reverse, which I know it's on private land, but it means that when you get to the exit onto the main roads, you might well be in a reverse position, and there's some problems there. So I'm concerned about building onto, even if it is flat car park space, I'm concerned about where those heavy-duty lorries would then go if that space is not available. I'm concerned about the fact they've had 3 applications a year for the last 8 years, and it's always an extra little bit. It seems to be encroaching. And I'm trying to, as far as I'm concerned, unless there's a very good reason, I don't see any point in encroaching onto a pleasant countryside in an ever-diminishing gap of countryside, unless there's a big benefit to it in terms of either employment or something else. So I'm not over keen on this one, and as it stands at the moment, I think I'm more likely to reject.
Okay, thank you. Now we come on to Rochelle Shepherd-Debay.
Hi. Well, almost everybody said everything I was going to do. Based on pages 69 and 70, paragraphs 13 to 19, more or less the NPPF says that we should be doing this, and it's a very good idea to increase employment, especially based on the fact that the IMF has claimed that we will probably have the worst unemployment since Maggie Thatcher's time due to COVID and Brexit. We're expecting 15% unemployment. Anything to increase employment in the borough is a very good idea at this point. And since the NPPF says we should be doing this, we don't have much of a choice. Period.
All right, thank you. Right, I think we've, I believe I'm correct in saying we've heard from everybody on this now. I haven't missed anybody, I don't think. So first question I have to ask now is, does any member wish to propose an alternative recommendation to that included in the officer's report for approval? Right, I'm assuming you've all had an opportunity to indicate and no one is. So in that case, we come to the, we obviously when we're considering this, we're aware of the fact that the parish council is objecting. We have a number of neighbours objecting. We've heard that the current development as proposed is within the whole site that is defined, and that we would probably be not looking anywhere near as favourably on proposals that took it beyond the current boundaries. But we have to deal with what is in front of us. We're aware that the local member has objected as well, and that we've had input from a number of other people on this. But I think we've attempted to answer all the members' questions, and no member is wanting to put forward an alternative proposal to defer or refuse the application. So as I said, we will go straight to the decision, and I will just go through in the same order that I took it just now of your comments, and just ask whether you wish to approve, reject or abstain on this application. So firstly, Chris Bowring.
Approve.
Okay, Stephen Conway.
Approve.
Thank you. Carl Duran.
I'd like to reject this, please.
Okay, thank you. Pauline Jorgensen.
Approve.
Okay. Abdul Lois.
I'd like to abstain, please.
You're abstaining. Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Andrew Mickleborough.
Approve.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Malcolm Richards.
Oppose or refuse, whichever term you use.
Okay, thank you. All right. And Rochelle Shepherd-Debay.
Approve, because we need more employment in the borough.
Okay, and I'm adding my vote to that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's eight members of the committee recommending approval, 1 member abstaining and 2 members voting against. On that basis, application 200-888 is approved. Thank you, Stefan. Sorry? Oh, my apologies. Yes, sorry. Right. Members, I think that concludes, and I think, Stefan, that is the last of the applications you're bringing forward tonight.
Yes, thank you very much.
Very much. So we now come on to application 193392, which relates to an extension of time limit at the Star Works, the site operated by Grundon. A number of members of the committee have visited this site in the past, and it has a long and checkered history. I'd like to just confirm also that because of the complex nature of this, I asked for a briefing for all members of the committee, which was undertaken by the officers just over 10 days ago. And we went, sorry, just over a week ago, and we went through this in some detail. So we have had a lot of our concerns and questions addressed, but I'm very aware that this particular application has created a lot of interest, and we have a lot of comments on it. So without further ado, and accepting, I think, Graham, you may have some camera issues, but we should be able to see your presentation. We go over to Planning Officer Graham Vaughan.
Yeah, that's right, Chair. Thank you. And can I just remind members that we do have our minerals and waste consultant available on this call, should you have any questions that need answering in that sense. So hopefully you can see that slide.
Yep.
Yep. So it's an application at Star Works, Star Lane, Knoll Hill, and it's to essentially vary the condition which is limiting the time for landfill operations on the site. It's located off the A4 on Star Lane and is at the most eastern boundary of the borough. It is a recognised major development in the Greenbelt. Residential properties are located particularly to the east of the site, some of which are in Woking Borough, but others are in Windsor and Maidenhead Borough. These are a couple of pictures that I took on the site in February this year. This is standing adjacent to the Hall Road, looking slightly further left. And again, further left, and you can see the tree line to the rear of the site. I've put together some aerial pictures from the council's mapping. So this shows the site in 1999, just essentially when works were starting in terms of the landfill operations. It's 2003. And then jumping forward a bit to 2010, and you can see the capping of this part of the site at that point. 2015, and finally 2019, where the site is relatively restored. So the current proposal seeks to extend operations by an additional 2 years, which would overall be 5 years longer than previously envisaged. This because whilst the deposit of non-inert waste is now complete, the deposit of inert waste as restoration of the land cannot take place in full until the deposit of inert waste is completed. The reasons given by the applicant for not completing this is finding the right quality of material to enable restoration, the cost of importing this material, the reduction in waste nationally and pushing waste up the hierarchy, and the reduction in waste produced by the construction industry due to economic downturn. The main issues of the planning application are the fact that ceasing operations now would prevent restoration of the land being completed. This would result in an awkward and contrived landform in the Greenbelt, which would be difficult for the public to use into perpetuity. It would also mean it would be difficult to resolve the drainage and landfill gas maintenance systems that would be put in place. However, continuing operations would prolong the impact on residential amenity for 2 more years in terms of noise from machinery and lorries. It's important to note, however, that the remaining conditions would remain unaffected by the current application. In terms of the planning balance, the current national planning policy recognises the need for landfill sites and how they may need to be extended in terms of being able to finish the site. However, it also notes this should be done without undue delay. The negative impact of allowing operations to continue would be the impact on residential amenity through lorry movements and the use of machinery. Whilst concerns have been raised regarding smells and litter, this will now relate to the other part of the site operated by the applicant and shouldn't be applied to this application. Against this impact is the effect of ceasing operations now, which would result in an awkward landform, which would be difficult to maintain and would be difficult for the public to access into perpetuity. And it's important to remember that this is all in the green belt. Therefore, currently, the planning balance is considered to tip favourably towards allowing an extension of time. In the members' update, there is a recommendation for an additional condition which would allow for monitoring of the site to take place. There is some clarification on elements of the report and also a letter from the applicant which we requested to demonstrate their confidence in completing the site. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you, Graham. Before we come on to this, I think we just need to remind a few issues here. As the planning officer has stated, there are two elements. If you could leave that site location plan in place, Graham, that would be helpful. Yep. The red line is the area we're talking about. The existing still operating part of the site, which is not subject to this application, is where the cursor is being moved now. And that includes the autoclave, for example, and has been handling a significant amount of material recently, in particular recent months. The site is partially completed. As I think you know, we learned that the capping is basically to seal the site, and we have more material to come in. And the applicant has indicated a variety of reasons why material hasn't come in. But we have, of course, also heard from a Windsor and Maidenhead ward member and also for the Maidenhead MP, who've drawn our attention to the fact that material has been available in the area that for reasons that are not clearly explained, Grundon have not chosen to use. But I would caution members at applying too much weight to that because we have to look at the application as it is in front of us. Now, obviously, we have two options. One is to approve or one is to refuse. And I think it's important that members fully understand the implications of a refusal on the site. And that would mean that the Grundon's ability to complete the formal restoration of the site would therefore be frustrated. And the question is then raised, what happens to the site that is left not fully restored, without the public footpath across it and without, I believe, amount of planting that would be done on it. So the site would look rather scarred. And I'm very anxious that such a situation should not in any way be considered to be the council's responsibility to pick up and resolve. Now, the other thing is I just draw your attention, of course, is that if we were to refuse this application, and we'll obviously have to hear all the arguments in due course, it is inevitable that an appeal would occur. And that appeal, because it's a waste application, would have to almost certainly be done at the planning inspector's discretion. It would nearly always be done by public inquiry. There would be a time gap before the applicant had to appeal. And that public inquiry, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Marcia, but we're seeing about a 12-month delay in public inquiries at the moment. So that would mean the current situation would continue for perhaps 12 to 15 months further before we knew what a planning inspector's decision would be. So if we were to refuse it today, the site will continue almost inevitably to operate until an appeal is ultimately resolved. The other thing is, of course, is the delay and the extension of time that they're seeking. I have some personal experience of this because living at the opposite extreme of the borough, in the south of Finchhamstead, I have a very large quarry very adjacent to where I live. And I would tell you now that that quarry is now on its third 5-year extension. So it has already had 15 years of extension. The last one has already expired, and they're now having to put in another extension. And this is, according to the quarry, it's a different company, is due to the shortage of appropriate types of material to go into the site. And that is partly brought about by environmental concerns, where many more buildings are now crushed on site and the material is used as part of the construction of a new process. So just wanted the members to be fully aware that whilst this is clearly and very obviously from the comments we've had, is a very unpopular proposal, we do have to weigh it against the consequences of not approving it and the uncertainty that then introduces into the whole matter. So without further ado, I'm going to come on to the members and ask them for their input, and we'll see whether we can address their questions. And we're going back in the original order, and I'll come first to Councillor Chris Bowring.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I went first last time, actually, but anyway, happy to start.
That was because you had problems speaking.
Oh, that's very kind of you then. Okay, you just said that we shouldn't put too much weight on the representation from the borough councillor in the Royal Borough. But
no, I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
You tell me what you said.
I said that we'd had representations about the availability of material in the area, that we weren't to know the reasons why Grundon had chosen not to make that material or take that material to the site. I think that's probably extending a little bit beyond our planning remit.
Okay, but we are we need to be sure that Grundons are doing their best to complete the works as soon as possible. And it seems of some significance that if we are to believe that there is all this whichever it is, waste available, which would complete the filling so that the vegetation could be sown immediately, it seems rather strange that they haven't done so. They've written a letter, Grundons have written a letter to us saying, I think that they would, that currently they expect to finish July next year, I think it said. But they didn't refer to the point about whether they had been offered for at no cost material to finish the landfill. So my question is that something that we should be taking into account and making a judgment on?
I think we'd have to refer to the officers for that.
Yeah, if I could draw members' attention to paragraph 7 in the report, which I think is what you're getting at, that there's been an offer made for some soil. There were particular reasons that the applicant wasn't able to take that further forward, and I've highlighted that in the report. I think the chairman is very right to say that this does start to go beyond what the committee should be considering. It was not part of the application submissions, and it's not a material consideration for us to start determining whether or not a business decision made by a business is a good or bad idea.
Okay, thank you. That answers the question. Thanks.
Did you have any other points, Chris?
Not at the moment, thank you, Simon.
Okay, Stephen Conway.
Thank you, Chairman. Presumably on that last point, if we were to grant an extension this evening, it would still be possible for Grundons to continue negotiations with the Royal Borough about this inert waste and whether they might acquire it. My understanding is the stumbling block is how it's got there. Council doesn't have vehicles that are able to bring it. So it's really a question whether Grundons will bear the cost of it being brought to the site. But those are not matters really for us, as you've said. But were we to grant an extension, if that were to happen, negotiations could take place. They could reach a resolution, and they could actually infill much sooner than perhaps the extension would suggest. There's obviously a lot of public concern about this, and it's very understandable, because were an extension to be granted, we would be prolonging the inconvenience and disruption that neighbouring properties have experienced over many years. I think, however, that the chairman has summed this up very well. If we were to refuse it, we would effectively be freezing everything as it is. We would be preventing the completion. We would be preventing the landscaping being introduced. Hello, can you hear me?
We have a huge amount of background noise.
I'm afraid my computer's doing the same thing as it did before. I think it will calm down in a moment.
Okay.
I think it will not be long before it. I don't know how much of it, what I've said, you've been able to hear. Yeah. Well, I was explaining that I very much understand the perspective of the residents and the local councillor in the Royal Borough. There is almost certainly, if we were to approve this, going to be a prolongation of the inconvenience and disruption that neighbouring residents have experienced over many years. So I'm very sympathetic with their concerns. However, I do think you, Chairman, summed this up very effectively. Were we not to give planning permission, we would effectively be freezing the site in its current state. We would be unable to bring about the completion that everybody wants. We would be unable to get material in that would enable this to happen. We would be unable to introduce the landscaping that everyone wants to see. So I'm very pleased we've now got an additional condition relating to monitoring, which gives us a little bit of control over the way Grundons continue to operate on this site. And it should give us some reassurance, I hope, that they are not prolonging this unnecessarily. So although I'm deeply sympathetic to the local residents, I don't think it will actually be in anyone's interest for us to refuse this application.
All right. Thank you. Stephen, you make a very good point, and I'm just wondering whether possibly, if we were minded to approve this on conclusion of the discussions, whether we could add an informative suggesting that the points raised in paragraph 7 about the potentially available material, asking the applicant, and that's all we can do, encourage or ask the applicant to enter into meaningful discussions with Windsor and Maidenhead to see whether they can come to a satisfactory arrangement to speed matters up by possibly using that material. That would show, I think, an indication of our clear intent of what we would like to have. But as I say, because this is extending, I think, somewhat beyond the planning remit, I don't think it's something that we can compel them to do. But I guess if the planning committee was to unanimously ask them to do this, to consider doing it, I would like to think it might carry a little weight.
I agree entirely, and I think an informative would be encouraging negotiations with the Royal Borough about the use of this inert material would be a very, very good idea, and I would propose that, in fact.
Okay. After suitable prod.
If you hadn't already done it, I would have proposed it, but I'll second your proposal.
Okay. So now can we come on to Carl Duran next, please? Carl.
Thank you, Chair. Well, yeah, there's clearly a downside in approving this application. Lots of objections, and there's obviously going to be an impact on residential amenity for some time, for a few years, in fact. And the upside is that the site, as it says in the report, would be restored in accordance with the agreed restoration plan. I'm still a bit confused, really, about what happens, because this is just a condition change, and I think I've had this question answered already when we had our briefing, but I would like to hear it again, really, because I am confused. If we refuse this condition change, the applicant would still be bound by this previous permission. It's literally just a time limit, as opposed to what they have to do. They would still have to do what we're asking them to. So why is that a problem?
I think the issue is that the current condition would mean they were not permitted in terms of time to undertake that restoration, because they would have reached their time limit, and therefore they would be in breach of that condition. So we can't say to people, we'll allow you to breach one condition in order not to breach another condition. That's my layman's view. I'd be happy if the officers wish to clarify that.
Yeah, this is perhaps a slightly kind of odd part of the planning in that normally things are not restricted by time, but this particular development is, and the effect of refusing the extension of time would essentially mean that a planning permission is no longer available for works to be carried out on the site. So if you were to refuse now, essentially work would have to stop, as there is no planning permission available. In practical terms, it is particularly awkward. Obviously, the site in itself would be left, as you saw in the pictures, or near enough. It was a few months ago, and there would be quite some difficulty with the Environment Agency, who regulate the permits that the applicant operates under. It is quite likely that the Environment Agency would not accept the site going into effectively a shutdown period because of the state that it's in. So it would be a bit of a toss-up between whether or not we could enforce from a planning perspective, or the Environment Agency would enforce from their perspective. I'm not really sure of of who would win that one, essentially, but it would be very difficult if work was to simply stop right now.
I would also think that you'll be in the difficult position that if, as the local planning authority, this was refused, and we then tried to pressure Grundon into completing the restoration, I would have thought they would have resorted to the law, and I would have thought the law would regard us as taking a very obtuse position by saying you can't have more time to do it, but we require you to do it. So hence this quandary and the difficulty that we are in on this particular type of application. As I say, this is not unique to this site, from my own personal experience in my ward. Did you have other points, Carl?
Yeah, I got a couple more questions. Thanks for that. That's really useful. Yeah, I got two more questions really. The first one is just getting my head around the time limits here, and how they've changed. Originally, effectively, they were given 17 years for the landfill, and apparently the inert waste, the soil and so on to go on top was also covered in that original 17 years. And then when that was extended 5 years ago, there was a 3-year extension, but there was a 4-year extension for the inert waste. So at that point, it seems to have gone from we needed no time to put that inert waste into needing 1 year. And this restoration itself would take another year. So that'll be 22 years. And now they're asking for another 2 years on both those, extending to 23 years to get the inert waste in, and 24 years to restore the site. Now, so it seems to me to be kind of going up exponentially, the amount of time they require to do it. Now, I take the points that have been made about access to material and so on. But the point I wanted to make was, in a couple of places in the report, it refers to this inert waste infill nearing completion. It's on the bottom of page 93, and also in paragraph 26 on page 100. So what's left to do on site to actually restore it? Because this seems to say it's nearing completion.
If I could perhaps refer you to the members' update and the letter that we received from the applicant. If I just get it myself.
Yeah, I've got it.
So one of the points, the landfill site covers an area of 17 hectares over large parts of the site. The placing of inert soils has now been completed. The areas that still require infill of soils to complete the restoration cover just 3 hectares. And areas that have achieved restoration levels are ready to be planted, and this will commence in the next planting season. And we expect 50% of the trees will be planted this winter over the restored areas. So there is, that's what is really is meant by nearing completion. There are still elements to do, certainly, but it is very much nearing the end of what they need to do.
Okay, thanks. My final question is that I know also from page 100, paragraph 26, the applicant, and this is what the report says, the applicant is requiring a 2 metre level of soil rather than the minimum 1.5 metres. And this is referred to as not significantly higher. I'm just wondering where that minimum requirement has come from.
I may defer that one to Susie, if that's all right.
Susie Coyne, are you able to join us?
Yes, hi, hello. I think the 2 metre has come from the fact that you generally need 2 metres to be able to plant trees and ensure that the roots don't go through the cap. So they need a minimum of 1.5 metres, but I think some for trees to establish properly, but preferably you'd want 2 metres so that you don't have any issues with the cap being breached and then pollution issues occurring at a later stage.
Thanks for that. That's really helpful, because my next point was going to be that the restoration infill apparently is 72% complete, which it says in the previous paragraph. And if we're going to allow, if we can cover it with 1.5 metres rather than 2, that would be 75%, and therefore all the soil they required would already be pretty much on site. But that explanation shoots that down. So thanks for that. Yeah, I've got no further questions.
Okay, all right. I think just at this juncture, before we come on to the next speaker, just also to remind the committee that a number of the objections referred to the problems with litter and smell. But of course, the site in question is now largely capped, and there should not be any litter coming from that part of the site. There may, and there shouldn't be, but there may be litter coming from the existing established part of the site that is, and smell, that is not covered by this application. But as they've stopped bringing in non-inert waste, and the only material to come in now is my understanding is a small quantity of inert waste and the necessary soil for planting, neither of those should generate litter or smells. That's my understanding. I'd be happy to be corrected if my interpretation is wrong. Right, we now come on to Pauline Jorgensen.
Thank you, Chairman. I've listened very carefully to all the evidence that's been provided, and to be honest, although I've got a lot of sympathy with the residents, I can't see that refusing this would help them. I think it would make things worse, so I propose to approve it.
Thank you very much. Now come on to Abdul Lois.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm minded to approve this application. However, going back to the smell, do we have any environmental health latest sort of their opinion? Because although you're saying there's no smell anymore, maybe, but
no, I said to be clear, I said that there should be no smell from the site we're considering. The rest of the Grundon site may or may not be, it's not the subject of what we're discussing tonight, but may or may not be generating potentially smells or litter.
All right, thank you, I've got that. Thank you.
All right, okay, Andrew Mickleborough.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I have a lot of sympathy with the residents on a matter that has been continuing for quite a considerable period of time. I would be very supportive of an informative along the lines that was discussed earlier, and I did have questions for officers about whether where soil was sourced from and how it was sourced, whether that was in fact a material planning consideration, and we were told that it's not, so thank you for answering that question. And I also had questions in relation to the role of the Environment Agency, which again have been answered. In particular, the question about possible responses, likely responses from the Environment Agency if the site was, the recommendation was for the site to simply be shut down. So my questions have been answered. I am inclined to support the application.
Okay, thank you. Malcolm Richards.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we heard your comment at the beginning about the consequences of the choices we make, whether we approve or reject. If we approve, which it seems to be pretty well the only option we have to get it done, then the residents will not be happy at all, I'm afraid, with that. However, the opposite decision wouldn't make them pay either, because if we sent the current people away and said, no, you've not done it, go away, we're not giving the extension, I'm concerned, obviously, about the state that he would be left in. Somebody would have to do something. We don't know who or what that would be, but it certainly wouldn't be a quick decision to make. And whoever took it on would take just as much time to set up and do that work. So we're not saving any time there. Therefore, I think if we approve it, there's a better chance. However, from our previous discussions, I remember we know there are some statistics coming out, numbers coming out about what they do there and what the volumes are. And I understand we'd be able to see those numbers about what happens when and how they're progressing, so that we could hopefully have a better idea of whether they're likely to achieve what they're doing as we go along. So the next question then is, if we had those numbers and they appear to be making good progress, that's fine. If they're not making good progress, what could we do? Could we enforce something against them? Is that possible, and how would that work? That's my question at the moment, is if we allow them to continue, which may be the only option we have, can we get measurements on how they're progressing, and would we need to enforce, and could we enforce if they weren't making progress? Okay, Graham?
So to clarify, what we're suggesting is a condition that would mean the applicant would have to submit essentially the amount left to do on the site to us.
Yes.
And this is what they already submit to the Environment Agency. So it would enable us to have a very good idea of exactly where they are. And obviously, we are looking at additional 2 years, so we would be able to tell, I think, relatively quickly. In terms of what we can do, it does become a little bit more difficult, but I think certainly it gives us reassurance as to exactly where they are on the site, and we can perhaps start with discussions at an earlier stage if things are not progressing in the way that we hope that they should do.
So friendly pressure rather than enforcement?
Potentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So it doesn't look, though, as though we have much of an option here, because whatever else would happen if we refuse it would take just as long, if not longer. So on this particular case, therefore, even though I'm afraid it's not going to be liked by the residents, I would have to go with approval on this. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Rochelle Shepherd-Dubey. Hello, Rochelle, are you able to join us?
Be a second to get here. I was going to say a couple of things. Why has Grundon refused some material in the past? Are we certain that inert material is not really available? I know they said at our briefing that it wasn't, but are we absolutely sure? I agree with the informative. I would like to ask Grundon to liaise with WBC on how much inert material they have, and showing how much of so they won't leave it in a mess, really, more than anything else. And add that to the informative to say, well, tell us how much you have, how much you need to get, and what percentage are you actually done now if we're going to approve this.
Okay, thank you. Did you have any other points you wish to make?
No, if we refuse this, though, I believe that it would leave it in a thorough mess that was even be worse than they possibly could do. Even if the Environment Agency wouldn't actually do anything about it, or would do something about it, it would still be a mess. We need it set back to where it's supposed to be, like you want the same thing in Finch Hempstead.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So I need to just clarify the wording for the proposed informative, and I think my suggestion is that the informative should relate to paragraph 7, and that the committee asks the applicant, Grundon, to enter into meaningful discussions with Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead to try and agree to use their best efforts to take advantage of available inert material to speed up completion and restoration of the site. Would members be happy to support that type of wording?
I'm very happy to support that. I think
Can we also ask them to liaise with WBC so we can find out what their progress is on a regular basis, rather than just finding out in 2 years that they still haven't done it yet?
Rochelle, we already have that as a condition that requires submission of quarterly data. Is that correct, Graham?
Yes, that's correct.
I want to double check that.
Okay. As it's an informative, I don't think we actually need to take a vote on it because it is guidance for the applicant as to the committee's wishes rather than what we insist on, because we can't insist on this. It's not a matter within our direct planning remit. So we've had a comprehensive presentation last week, which was over an hour, which we went through it. We've covered further points tonight. I think every single one of the committee acknowledges the very understandable concerns of the nearby residents and their representatives, but the committee's feeling is that simply denying this in its current form would actually lead to a further procrastination over completion of the site and would lead us into an area of significant uncertainty, which I think is to be, we believe should be avoided. So does anybody wish to firstly make an alternative proposal to the officer's recommendation? Okay.
Simon?
Okay. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Cal.
Would you just like me, just for the benefit of the public watching, just confirm the statements that members have already received and considered?
Absolutely, because there was quite a few.
Yes.
From the consultant and the MP and so on. Yep.
Indeed. So objectors-wise, there was one statement submitted by the firm Barton Wilmore on behalf of a number of residents of Star Lane and Knoll Hill. There was another objection submission which was received by Councillor Maureen Hunt, who is the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead ward member for Hurley and Waltham. Supporters, there was a statement submitted by Miss Veronique Bensadu, who's the interim head of estates at Grundons.
Yep, thank you very much. And obviously we also had comments, written comments, from a large number of neighbours and the MP as well. So, so members, I'm then going to, because it's important and controversial, I know most of you have actually indicated your support, but I'm just going to quickly formally go through the committee members just to get your confirmation as to whether you support the application, whether you wish to abstain, or whether you wish to refuse the application. And I'll go through in the order we've just heard all your comments. So firstly, Councillor Bowring.
Thank you. Just to clarify, we're also voting on the extra condition in the members' update.
The extra condition members' update and the informative that I've already described.
That's fine. I approve that.
Okay, thank you. Stephen Conway.
I also approve.
Thank you. Carl Duran.
I'm going to abstain. Thank you.
Okay, right. Pauline Jorgensen.
I support it.
Thank you. Abdul Lois.
I'd like to approve it.
Thank you. Andrew Mickleborough.
Approve.
Thank you. Malcolm Richards.
Approve it.
Thank you. Rochelle Shepherd-Debay.
I approve it, and I hope they don't come back with another request in 2 years to say they can't do it yet.
Thank you. I just needed a yes or no. Thank you, Rochelle. Okay, so that is approved by all bar one member of the committee. So we have one member abstaining on that application. Thank you for your patience, members, and thank you for the forbearance of those listening in on the other way of viewing this committee. So if we now move on to the next application, which is a application by the council itself. And Graham, you're also handling this one. And this is an application to upgrade the existing park and ride facility at Winnish Triangle by means of a large decked area on the existing single-storey facility. providing an additional 104 spaces. And I'm going to, Graham, are you able to go straight in on this one then, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just get this set up. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
Yes.
Right. So the site is located in Winner's Triangle between the A329M and Reading Road. In policy terms, it is located in a major development location. The site currently comprises of a park and ride facility adjacent to Winner's Triangle railway station. To the north are offices comprising part of Winner's Triangle Business Park, and to the south is the railway line and residential dwellings. The site is bounded by mature vegetation. These photos show the existing parking facility and in an east and west direction, and views to the surrounding vegetation can be seen. And these photos show the existing railway station building on the left and the current station access. The proposal comprises of two main elements: a new parking deck above the existing ground floor parking, and changes to the access with urban realm improvements. More specifically, this would involve creating a fourth arm off the existing roundabout on Wharfdale Road and changing the location of the access, leading to a turning area. Revised pedestrian and cyclist access would be provided, as well as hard and soft landscaping features. The deck would exist above the existing parking, accessed by ramps and supported by columns as shown by the elevation plans. It is also proposed to provide photovoltaic panels above the decked area. The site primarily consists of hard standing, however there are views to existing vegetation around the site boundary. Whilst the deck structure would be a solid urban feature, it is not considered to be out of keeping with this, particularly as the wider area comprises of office buildings with associated parking. Additionally, the urban realm improvements would help facilitate the use of the site and are considered appropriate to the area. The proposal would result in the park and ride facility having greater capacity, as the site already provides access for many people to two business parks in the area, Thames Valley Business Park and Winner's Triangle Business Park. As such, it is a transport hub for local businesses and also helps divert car journeys into Reading Town Centre. Additionally, the changes to the access would improve the situation for pedestrians and cyclists. As a result, the scheme offers tangible transport benefits, which are a positive impact of the proposal. The transport assessment and an environmental appraisal report were submitted with the application, which covers technical highway matters, environmental health, flooding and drainage, crime prevention, technical tree matters and ecology factors. As set out in the report, subject to conditions, these elements are considered acceptable. In the members update, there's some clarification on the number of electric vehicle charging spaces. As such, subject to the conditions set out in the officer report, the application is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Graham. I'm certainly hoping that this application is one we can probably process a little more quickly than the first three applications, because I would draw members' attention to the fact that there's been no comments from Winner's Parish Council. The local members, Councillor Bray and Fishweek, have both added their support for the application, and the neighbours, there have been 4 letters of comment which do not raise very significant matters. They're more for information. So members will see that quite a significant area of decking is proposed. There is not, on the face of it, a commensurate increase in parking. That's because of I've already asked these questions of the officers and got the answer that this is because of all the up and down ramps and so on, basically taking away potential parking areas. We also had a question raised about whether chevron style parking, that is where you're parking at probably roughly a 45-degree angle rather than a 90-degree angle to the outside of the building, whether it would accommodate more, but the conclusion was that that does not actually help matters. The photovoltaic panels will obviously add probably significant amount of power, no doubt beyond what is used by the lighting and ticket machines of the unit itself. And if any of you are wondering what passive electric vehicle parking spaces are, I've already asked that question, and that relates to putting in all the wiring, but not actually putting in the device unless it's proved later that a demand is required. That is far less disruptive to put that kind of fundamental utility installation in, and then be able to connect it up with the external units if necessary. So, members, we're going to go through this application in a different order now this time. So we're starting with Rochelle first, who happens, of course, also to be a ward member for this area. Rochelle, over to you.
Okay, I have a few questions. Pauline has said that they're looking at putting a lift into the station for handicapped access. Can this be part of this project as well? Second question is, I know they're going to move all of the park and ride somewhere else to be determined during this work is done. What are they going to do about the train users? If they move the park and ride to one of the proposed places like Broken Brow, I don't know how the heck they're going to get to the train from that particular location. And where are the handicap spaces going to be? Are they going to be on the ground floor, hopefully, or on the first floor with a ramp going to the station? I'm just trying to figure out what they're planning on doing for otherwise able passengers.
Okay, we try and get some answers to the issue of a lift, where the alternative parking will be during this construction phase.
Pauline may be able to answer that better than the officers.
Well, in the first instance, we'll ask the officers.
Okay.
That's their role, and if Pauline needs to supplement their answers, she can. So over to you, Graham.
Can I just clarify your question about the lift? Are you saying in terms of, is there a lift to the decking section?
To the decking and or to the station, because Pauline has been speaking in a couple of times to answer to some of the questions we have gotten for handicapped accessibility to the station itself. And I figured while you're doing all this, you could put the lift in also.
So there is a lift proposed with the scheme to take you up into the decking area down to the floor. And in terms of spaces for disabled users, if you looking at the plan that's on the screen at the moment, if you can see the yellow, kind of bright yellow spaces indicated kind of bottom right.
Yes.
Those are the disabled spaces there.
Yes, I can see those.
Yeah.
I just wanted to double check that those were the ones. That's all.
Yes. Yeah. And in terms of where would parking go during construction, I think part of it is proposed across at Winnish. I can't remember exactly where now. I might have to defer on something to Pauline.
I've heard it's going to go to the old park and ride.
I think that might be right.
Either to the old park and ride, which Showcase may want to keep and use for something else, or going to Broken Brow.
Right.
Yeah, I believe that is correct.
So clearly, whichever option is chosen, it should be the one that is closest to the railway facility and is most accessible, because clearly we're not trying to discourage people from using trains.
And we don't want them parking in the local streets instead when they can't find a space.
Would you like me to add something, Simon?
Yes, please, Pauline.
Yeah, I talked to officers this morning about these two questions because the issue came up at full council.
I asked it.
You did indeed ask it, and I suggested that the disabled access, if we could, from this car park, would be able to access the station, which I think is what you're after, rather than accessing the ground, which the officer was talking about. I've talked to the officers. They have not worked through the access yet, but they know that that's what we'd like to do. And there was a suggestion that maybe we could actually extend the bridge in between the hotel and the car park to then go to the station as well, but they need to look at that. So it's not a promise, but it's a suggestion. When I asked officers about the access and the car parking, they didn't know where the plan was. They couldn't. The person I asked couldn't tell me. He isn't the officer that actually looks after this plan in detail, but he said he'd find out.
Can we get the officers to brief the winners' councils on what they're planning on doing when they finally get around to deciding?
Yeah.
Please.
I think. Okay. Thank you, Rochelle. Now come on to Malcolm Richards.
Look. Yes, sorry, my screen disappeared. Yes, obviously, more parking at the station is desirable. It was said that it won't get as many spaces as they'd like because of the up and down things, but it does increase the parking by 104 spaces, so that's clearly worthwhile. Having more parking spaces near a station is, of course, desirable because we want everything to be sustainable and we want people to go by public transport. So being able to park near a station and then go by train is obviously a good step. I thought I was seeing something on lighting here. I'd like to know, the lighting will be on in the evening, presumably until at least the time of the last train. Is that, have I missed that somewhere, or can I ask that question? What's the plan for lighting at night? It's not going to be in total darkness, presumably, and would need to be probably 50 to 20 minutes after the last train to Reading or London. That's the question for the moment.
Okay, Graham, are you able to answer that?
So there are lighting columns proposed, which would essentially be attached to the decked area. I'm not sure about timings yet. I would say that that's probably not been agreed at this stage. It is a kind of detailed design matter. I do just want to double check about condition and whether or not we've got a lighting scheme.
Because I think if people won't use it late at night,
we understand lighting. We understand that, Malcolm. We understand. I think it's most improbable that we provide a chargeable parking facility without lighting at appropriate times. Certainly, I wouldn't support the lighting being on particularly long after the last train, unless we are seeing there's a lot of other users of the car park who would need to return to their cars even later. I think that's probably unlikely.
All right. I have no other questions, and I approve of this application.
All right. We'll come on to you now, Andrew Mickleborough.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think this application has many merits and I'm very likely to support it, but I do have two questions. I note the data on page 131 on estimated additional two-way vehicle movements. Do these figures refer specifically to Wharfdale Road only? Linked to this, whilst it would seem to me a very good thing if decking the park and ride helped to reduce traffic flowing down Wokingham Road and into Reading, wouldn't it be likely to lead to an increase in traffic, particularly at peak times, along the already congested Lower Early Way, Winners section of Wokingham Road, and around Showcase Roundabout? And in that context, are highways officers confident that the stated fairly significant increase in traffic flows at peak times on those roads are manageable? My second question relates to funding. On page 130, it's stated that funding is currently only in place for the decking element of the scheme. It sounds as though there's a possibility that the access alterations and other urban realm improvements might not take place at the same time as decking, although I'm sure that that would be the preferred option. Do these access alterations refer to vehicle access? And if that's the case, can officers give assurances that road safety will not be compromised whilst waiting for access alterations?
Okay, good points. I don't know whether Graham or Judy wishes to take those.
I will defer to Judy, but I would say that it has been looked at in quite a lot of detail with our highway officers.
Yeah, so can I just clarify the last question about road safety? Was that to do with whilst they're in the construction phase and changing the access specifically?
I don't know. I'm just referring to the reference that at the moment, okay, the access, quote, the access alterations have not secured funding. And so I'm seeking clarification exactly what that refers to, and if it does refer to road access, would that create safety issues?
Okay, well, I think I can't really comment on the funding element because I'm not quite sure where discussions got to on that part. But pretty much the scheme as it's shown on the screen at the moment sort of stands as one whole. Really, the access has to be realigned with the revised bus stop laybys and the car park layout and so on. So the planning application we're looking at as a whole is what we see on the screen at the moment. I can't really answer the question on funding. I'm not quite sure if Pauline might have anything to add. Just in terms of the question on additional vehicular movements. So as Graham mentioned, there has been a transport assessment done of the area, and there's been an extensive LINSIG analysis of all the immediate junctions in the vicinity to ensure that the additional traffic generation from the additional parking spaces can be accommodated within the highway network, which it can. So there's quite a lot of detailed traffic signals junction work that's been done on that.
Can I just clarify that the traffic impact statement would have included, for instance, Showcase Roundabout and Lower Early Way?
So included the 3 junctions, just get them up on the screen. So the Wharfdale Road, Eskdale Road junction, the on-slips to the A329M, and Wharfdale Road B3270 junction. Anything kind of further afield than that, the additional traffic is just dissipating to such small numbers, it wasn't appropriate to carry out an assessment.
If I can just add a little bit on the funding element. At the time of writing the report, it was very much that funding was only in place for the decking element. I have just been told by the agent that it's very likely that funding is going to be available for the entirety of the scheme. There's kind of a small bit left to do on that. The idea was, though, that the different elements of the scheme are able to be brought forward independently of each other. And this would very much be that it wouldn't impact detrimentally on access or indeed movement across the highway. And one thing that we did discuss at length was condition number 14, to ensure that things like the bus stops would be provided in that particular event where perhaps the decking was occurring and not the access changes, so that buses wouldn't be stopping on the highway. So I do appreciate your comments, but I think that shouldn't be a case that there will be any detrimental impact if one element of the scheme didn't occur.
And that's good news on the funding. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Before we move on, that does raise quite an important issue. We've discussed an application tonight based on what we see in front of us and the appropriate access, particularly for disabled folk. Therefore, I'm a little uncomfortable at the possibility of this being delivered in 2 distinct phases. And I might be minded that we should apply again an informative, asking the council to ensure that the whole scheme is delivered rather than it becoming a 2-phase thing, because there could be a potential gap between those 2 phases. Pauline, as a lead member on highways, I just wonder whether you had any input on that.
Yes, I think that's very reasonable. In addition, I've got an email which I received on the 6th of July from officers, because I'd asked the same funding question, that said funding was available from the LEP and the remainder was being paid for by 106 and that it was fully funded.
Okay, well, in which case including such an informative should not be unduly onerous. It would certainly keep people focused on our wish to see the whole scheme implemented.
I'd be very happy with that.
Okay, well, we'll come on to that when we've heard everybody else. Okay, that was Andrew. Abdul Loy next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Landscape and trees. I understand you are replacing 15. I hope no one is cutting any more trees or any other vegetation along north side. Did you get me?
Graham? Graham, can you comment on potential
Yeah,
tree loss?
sorry, I was trying to unmute. So I just want to check if I highlighted that in the report. Is that where you're getting the number from?
Abdul?
Yes.
Abdul, you referred to 15 trees.
Yeah. On page 133 on the top.
Right. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. So yeah, that is what is proposed to be removed, and that's been undertaken through a tree survey of the site, assessing the quality of the trees and what would need to be removed to accommodate the development, and no more than those that are stated would be removed.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. So just to be clear, 10 moderate quality trees are replaced by 15 new trees, which would presumably be trees appropriate for that location.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any other points, Abdul? Okay.
No, thank you, Chairman.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Abdul. Pauline Jorgensen, we've obviously heard a little bit from you on this, but I take it you'll be in support.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'm very much in support of this. Just to explain for people who've just watched this bit of the video, I am allowed to vote. I've been advised that I haven't got an interest in this, but I'm very much in favour of it, and I would very, very much like to see the change that we could make to allow disabled access to the station, if that's possible, as well.
Yep. Okay. Good. Carl Duran.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I've worked on and off Winners Triangle for about over 20 years, so I know this site very well. And it's in a surprising way, really. Unlike other park and ride sites or developments of this size, it's virtually no objections. But I can see why, really. You know, it's in a location that's already hidden. I mean, it's going to be a large construction, but it's going to be hidden from the residential areas by the railway embankment. Massive contribution to reducing congestion and carbon emissions. You know, all very welcome. And despite the fact, well, I think we've heard that the funding might very well be available for this public realm and fourth arm, but that fourth arm off that roundabout is a brilliant idea, and that looks good as well. Although, you know, I'd like a few more trees than, you know, getting rid of 10, putting 15 in. Be good to see more, but it's not too bad. And I support the informative you mentioned, Chair, as well. That sounds a good idea. The only question I've got is, and it's not my question, and I'm stealing it from the Lib Dem councillors for Winnersh, who asked in their contribution, said there are 3 spaces reserved for station staff at the moment, and this is being reduced to 2. We do not understand why this reduction is taking place. So I'd be interested to see, and I haven't checked that myself, to be honest, so they could have been mistaken in some way. But I'd just be interested to know why that's changed.
Yeah. Just Graham, are you able to shed any light? It's quite a specific detail, but do you know why?
I don't know specifically why. As far as I can understand, there isn't a significant demand from Network Rail to provide staff spaces, and I think it is considered that the station does not have a significant amount of staff requirement. I think it is something that could be considered through the more detailed design stage following a potential approval of planning application. Obviously, as it is our scheme, there is perhaps some discretion that we could take that forward and look to try and provide 3. I think there is one element to consider, that one space being taken away for that purpose would obviously be one less space for the general public to use. But obviously there is a balance to be made in that respect.
Yeah. I wouldn't say I was totally in favour of, yes, let's have 3. I just think it's interesting that it's reduced. I mean, maybe that you know, that I mean, I've used that train station many times and I've never seen more than 1 member of staff, so it could very well be that there isn't a requirement for 2 even. But yeah, it's not going to stop me from approving this. Yeah, it's good. Thanks.
Thank you. Personally, I would have assumed that with their staff passes, that staff would be generally working on the railways would come to work on the train, actually. But of course, I may be wrong. Okay. Stephen Conway.
Thank you, Chairman. Carl's already raised the point that the local members raised about the staff parking, but they also raised a point about what appears to be no parent and child parking spaces having been allocated. Given what Graham said about the possibility after the application's approved of discussions about this in the detailed design features of it, could we incorporate that suggestion that there would be some designated parent and child parking spaces allocated? I think that would be helpful. I think this is
Stephen. Sorry, Stephen, could I just stop you there? Could we ask Judy, are you able to clarify that, Judy? Would it be I would assume it would have been our normal practice to provide such spaces?
We don't actually have any parking standards sort of saying that we have to provide parent-child spaces. They're not massively common at park and ride sites. I mean, they're more common at supermarkets and so on. Yeah, but I did ask the question of the design team, and they said that's something they can always take into consideration at the detailed design stage. But in terms of the planning application, there's no sort of hard and firm.
Okay.
I certainly would,
right,
because I think it was
again, Stephen, I think we could, Stephen, I'd suggest that we could add an informative saying that it was the committee's wish that there should be some parent and child parking spaces, whilst fully acknowledging that probably, the provision of 3 parent and child parking spaces would probably mean the loss of 4 unrestricted parking spaces because of their greater width.
Yep. Well, on this occasion, I was actually going to propose that as an informative.
Sorry.
You beat me to it, but I'm very happy to support it, or something like that. I thank you for that, and yes, I would like that as an additional informative if we can do that. I just wanted to say something briefly about a point Andrew raised earlier on. With characteristic rigour, Andrew pointed out that there are downsides to expanding car parks, and the obvious downside is the generation of additional road traffic, because if there's places to park, people will come to it. But I think we need to also bear in mind the upside, which is this will, one hope, enable more people to use the railway, which is a very good thing. In fact, it's such a good thing that I would urge the council to consider approaching the rail authorities about a similar type of structure at Twyford railway station. This would be perfect for us. So that's nothing to do with this application, I know, and therefore not appropriate, but I thought I'd mention that in passing. But I support the application, especially if we can add an informative effect you just mentioned.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. And finally, Chris Bowring.
Yes, I fully support this application. Could I tweak that informative to say that the parent-child spaces should be on the ground floor rather than the new floor?
You certainly can, Chris. That would be perfect. Yes, that was what I intended. Thank you.
Take that as done. Right. Okay. Good. Right. I think we've heard from everybody. So I haven't heard any dissent. So rather than go round each
I'm not
member...
happy with the informative, Simon.
Sorry? You're what?
I'm not happy to support the informative.
Which informative? Because we're planning 2.
The one on the parent-child spaces, because it will reduce the amount of parking. Obviously, parking in that car park is very popular, and I don't want to reduce the number of spaces.
But the informative I was going to suggest is that the planning committee asks WBC to consider parent and child spaces for the ground floor, not requiring them to do it, because an informative can't require anybody to do anything. So perhaps we could say consider to evaluate and consider whether there would be a demand for parent and child spaces on the ground.
How about to consider it as long as it doesn't reduce the number of spaces overall?
Well, as I said earlier, I fear that probably providing 3 parent-child spaces would lose you 4 unrestricted spaces. I can't really see. They've clearly come up with a design that maximises the potential spaces, and providing bigger spaces will inevitably result in potentially the loss of at least 1 space, depending on how many.
I will not be supporting that informative.
Okay.
3 is
All right.
reasonable, but a whole lot more probably isn't, because I'm not sure how many parents and children actually ride the train or take the
Well,
bus to.
I mean, I am picking up very much on Judy's point that she's not aware that these are provided elsewhere. They are the sort of thing you see at supermarkets, but I don't recall ever seeing parent and child. Now, the fact they're not provided at parent and child spaces not provided at Park and Ride, it could be self-fulfilling. There's no such spaces. Maybe parents with young children choose, therefore, not to go by train. But I think
there are none in Woking Town Centre either in any of the car parks there.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I'm hearing some resistance to parent and child spaces. So, but in that case, we'll go about it more formally. There is a proposal that we ask the council through an informative to consider and evaluate whether parent and child spaces should be provided on the ground floor. We've already heard from Pauline that she's not happy to support that, which I fully understand. Could other members that do not wish to support that please indicate, or by saying so, please? Do other members wish to not support?
I agree, Chairman. I agree with Pauline's comments.
No, I'm asking people to indicate whether they do not support the informative.
Simon, can I suggest members that don't wish to support the informative place their hands up, and I'll let you know who it is.
Okay, if you can see them. Yeah.
Malcolm, this is people who don't want to support it. Sorry. So I've got Pauline.
I want to support Pauline's one.
So Malcolm's agreeing with me.
So you're agreeing that they should. Okay, so can you raise your hand then, Malcolm and Pauline, and then anybody else who also doesn't wish for that informative?
Right.
So, yeah.
So we're on 2. So
appears to be 2.
That informative, I think, should stand, and I think you had the wording for that. Okay, Callum.
Yep.
Yeah, and then the other informative, which I think everybody was happy to support, but I will just check that again by a show of hands in a moment, was an informative that the planning committee asked that the borough council should make its best efforts to deliver the scheme in its entirety rather than in 2 phases. Would that be suitable wording, everybody? Could you please indicate whether you'd support that simple informative?
I support.
No, by hands, please.
Yes, it is. It's up.
Oh, right. Okay, fine. You don't need to speak. Fully support. That's fully supported. So that's carried. Okay, members. So again, just for clarity, I do not feel it's necessary. Well, could I ask you all, please, therefore, to show that you do support planning application 200856 by could everybody please remove their hands, because we don't know whether people have left their hand up from the last vote. Right. Could you now please indicate whether you support the application?
And looking at that,
how many have you got? 8. And for some reason, I'm unable to do so because it's only giving me the option of lowering my hand, which I thought was up.
Okay.
But anyway, that is unanimous.
Yes.
That is carried unanimously. Thank you, members. We now move on to next application, which I can get to it. Relates to Cantley Park Recreation Ground. And this is going to be presented by Sophie Morris, but we also have Connor Corrigan joining as the service manager for strategic development locations. Good evening, Connor.
May I do my declaration, Simon?
Evening, thank you. Yes, please. Sorry, Chris. And you're declaring now because when I asked for declarations before, you were losing your microphone. So could you fire away with your declaration?
Thank you. Yes, I'm a member of Wokingham Theatre, which is not too far away from this site. Look, although I don't think, were this application been passed, the theatre would benefit, I have been advised to declare a personal interest.
But you should still be allowed to vote in that case.
Yes, and discuss.
Fine. Thank you very much. Thank you. So, Sophie, good evening. We'll head straight to you.
Thank you very much. Can I just check that everybody can see my screen that I've shared?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, yes, so this application seeks full planning permission for the proposed construction of a new 3G artificial grass pitch with floodlights, the refurbishment of existing pavilion to provide new changing facilities with a viewing balcony and ancillary cafe, improvements to the existing grass pitches and the provision of an additional 39 parking spaces within the existing car park. The site is located within Cantley Park in North Wokingham, part of which falls within the North Wokingham strategic development location. The site is bound to the north and east by Balfoundry Lane, to the west by Twyford Road and Milton Road to the south. The site is within Wokingham Borough Council's ownership and has a number of existing recreational facilities on site, along with grass pitches and areas for leisure and recreation activities, and an ancillary pavilion building which has changing facilities and toilets and a hall at first floor level. There are 2 parking areas on site, one immediately inside the main entrance to the park and one which is further into the site adjacent to the existing tennis courts. The proposals relate to the playing fields area on the north side of the park where the artificial grass pitch is proposed. The site has been identified within the Wokingham Local Football Facility Plan as one of 6 priority investment projects to deliver an identified shortfall in artificial playing pitches across the borough. The AGP would be located close to the existing pavilion building, which is proposed to be refurbished in conjunction with the proposals. The existing car park is proposed to be extended to provide an additional 39 parking spaces, 4 of which would be of a suitable size for minibuses. 4 electric vehicle charging spaces are proposed, along with an additional 2 disabled parking bays and cycle parking provision. The pitch itself would have 6 floodlights positioned around its perimeter and would be enclosed by a 4.5 metre high welded mesh fence. The Football Association have advised that it has been designed in accordance with their technical guidance and that they are fully supportive of the proposals. The lighting levels associated with the floodlights have been reduced from the initial submission, and WBC Ecologist is satisfied with the amended details in relation to the potential impact upon the adjacent bat foraging and commuting corridor. The refurbishment works to the pavilion building primarily involve internal alterations such as new changing rooms to provide separate male and female changing facilities and toilets. A cafe area is also proposed at ground level. Whilst the internal alterations in themselves do not require planning permission, the associated external alterations to the facades do. However, these alterations are considered to be minor in nature and are necessary to accommodate the internal reconfigurations, such as the removal and provision of new doors and windows. A viewing balcony is also proposed at first floor level, which would overlook the playing pitches. In conjunction with achieving sustainable design objectives, solar panels are proposed on the southern roof slope of the pavilion building. However, these would not be highly visible from surrounding vantage points other than whilst walking or driving past along the access path to the rear. The alterations to the building are considered to be modest in nature and compatible with the character and appearance of the building. In conjunction with the proposals and as compensation for the loss of a lime tree and a small section of hedgerow, a landscape strategy is proposed, which would involve the provision of new trees and hedge planting located along the northern boundary of the car park, adjacent to where the new spaces would be provided. The landscape strategy indicates that this area would accommodate 21 new trees, a hedgerow and a wild seed mix on the newly graded embankment of the field, along with other locations of species-rich grassland planting to provide ecological enhancements to the site. The landscape proposals are considered acceptable in the context of the proposed development and will provide a softening edge to the edge of the car park and will also be of ecological benefit. In summary, the proposals are considered acceptable, resulting in improved sport and recreation facilities within the park and in line with the Council's strategic objectives for new and improved sports provision in the borough. The proposals are not considered to be harmful to the character of the surrounding area, nor to surrounding existing residential amenity. The application is therefore recommended for approval with conditions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that summary, Sophie. Members, again, this application obviously it should, I think, be broadly viewed in a positive light by most members. You will have seen that more than 400 neighbouring properties were consulted, and that produced 2 objections, and also the 4 supporting comments. and I believe that some further comments were circulated in the last few days. That's correct, isn't it, Callum? Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. And also just note that no comments from local members on this, and that Wokingham Town Council, I think the summary was largely supportive of the application. They did raise a number of points. These are on page 155, and I think the officer was able to give quite positive answers to the points they've raised. If you have a look down those, most of Wokingham Town Council's concerns or preferences are being incorporated into the scheme. So I think this is a good scheme. It provides additional updated facilities, additional parking spaces, some photovoltaic panels, some electric vehicle charging points, and as we've seen, only 2 objections out of 400 people consulted. So I think it has broad support. So I'm now going to come on to members and go through it. Firstly, I don't think we have. Which ward is this in specifically?
In Norwich, it's in my ward.
So it's you. So Malcolm, although it's different from the sequence I was planning, we will come to you first as ward member.
Thank you. Anything that improves access to sport and recreations in the borough is welcome, really, because those sort of activities assist good health for our residents. So that's a good point anyway. It's upgrading existing facilities and adding new ones, which obviously makes it even more attractive. Part of the improvements will have a new 3G sports pitch. And the benefit of that is that it enables greater use. It's potentially available 12 months a year rather than just the summer and light seasons. So it's better use, longer time and so on. The facilities also make it more attractive for people to come there because there'll be better lighting, better access, better viewing, better changing. So it's being upgraded quite substantially. The things that people usually question about sports pitches and things is the floodlighting and the car parking, and sports centres is floodlighting, car parking. I note that the floodlights have been questioned and modified and now have full approval from all the relevant people so that it doesn't affect the local neighbourhood, and also is understandably fair to things like bat life and other local natural areas. Car parking's been improved by 39 extra spaces as well. So it's upgraded, is new things, is more car parking, better facilities. It's also, by being more attractive for the borough, which is good for health, it avoids people having to drive outside the borough to find good facilities elsewhere. So that will also, or should also, reduce the amount of cars driving through the borough going somewhere else. So that reduces carbon emissions and makes it more accessible. And basically, I think all round it's a benefit. It's also part of the SDL for North Wokingham, so it suits both the local residents and those slightly further afield. And I fully support the application.
Okay, thank you, Malcolm. I'll now revert to the former sequence as we go through, and I'll ask Chris Bowring next.
Well, I entirely agree with Malcolm's eloquent summary of this excellent proposal. I can't see any good planning reasons why we should do anything other than approve it in double quick time.
Thank you, Chris. Stephen Conway.
I don't think there's anything I need usefully to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Carl Duran.
Sorry, I'm going to be a little bit slower. Yeah, it's a good setup. I like it.
Carl, there will be no affordable housing with this, okay?
Yes, I got that one. Yeah. Obviously, on these we've had before, these 3G pitches, the noise and the floodlighting has always been a problem, but that's because they've been very close to residential areas, and this doesn't have that problem really. It's quite a distance away from any the nearest residents, and there's been no, as you say, no objections on it. The one thing I would mention is the Woking Town Council talking about the number of stands for cycles. I think it's probably too late to change this anyway, but I think in a site like this, which is sport related, you tend to get a bigger contingent of people who are likely to cycle there. So it's one of the things I would have done when I was younger. And we have the new cycleway on the Northern Distribution Road as well, so just down the road. So I think it would have been better to have more than that. But other than that, you know, I can't see any.
Could I just point out, the 12 spaces provide accommodation for 24 bikes. And I think 24 is quite a bit more generous than 12.
Oh yeah, it's generous. I just think that there should be more, but as do Woking Town Council. Yeah, other than that, I can't see any downside to this one. And I would say that if we have to remove any trees at all, it's always a sad thing. But removing one and replacing it with 21 is the kind of ratio we should be doing everywhere. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Pauline Jorgensen.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got no problems with this at all. I think it's a really good proposal and very eloquent comments so far.
Okay, thank you. Abdul Lois.
Thank you, Chairman. Fantastic report, and I fully support of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew Mickleborough.
Yes, I'm also very pleased that we're able to consider this application tonight that would provide new and improved sports facilities in the borough and all of the benefits that this brings. But I do have two very, very short questions in relation to parking. There's a reference on page 165 to a condition requiring a parking management strategy to ensure, amongst other things, quote, no overlap between any large-scale events proposed by other users of the park. How exactly would this be achieved and enforced to ensure that parking on site is sufficient? And then secondly, a question not about the provision of spaces for cycles parking, but for motorcycles. I note the provision of just 2 spaces for motorcycles. Does the borough currently have guidelines providing or regarding provisions for the number of spaces for motorcycles? Given the number of people using the park and probable further growth in numbers, it would seem to be quite likely that there may be many times when there are more than 2 motorcycles on site. And when this happens, excuse me, is there a danger that motorcycles could take up much needed car parking spaces? And the reason why I'm raising this is I'm just wondering whether we might add an informative asking whether the borough could consider and evaluate the arguments for perhaps providing more motorcycle spaces.
Right. Motorcycles, I don't know whether Sophie or whether Judy you want to take that, because I'm afraid I'm not sure what the ratios are.
Can I refer to Judy, if that's okay? I mean, all I would be able to add was that the level of provision that's proposed was deemed to be in accordance with WBC parking standards for this proposal. So I don't know if Judy has anything else that she wants to add to that.
Yeah, so I just pulled up the parking standards. So for the D2 outdoor pitches use class, the requirement is 1 motorcycle space per 40 car parking spaces. So in this case, they would need a maximum of 1 motorcycle space, and I think they're providing 2, you said, so fully compliant.
So we're providing 2 when in theory we should be providing 1. Is that correct?
Maximum of 1, yeah, 1 motorcycle space per 40 car parking spaces.
Okay. Andrew, I fear this is one of these issues where I don't think anyone would disagree with the sentiment of what you say, with the guidelines of which we're operating for parking spaces, just as we found with some of the residential ones, currently allow for 1, and I think like for 1 or 2, I think that would be deemed adequate. Would you be happy to accept that?
Well, could I just clarify, what is the total number of parking spaces on site? Because there's a talk of an additional 39 spaces, so that would require, it would seem, 1 motorcycle parking space. How many existing car park spaces are there on the site?
125.
Yes, that's correct.
Changes the calculus a lot, doesn't it? So that would suggest, if I've got it correct, 4 motorcycle spaces would be required in total.
But this is the planning application is to change the existing position. So we can't retrospectively apply today's standards to parts of the site that already have permission, namely the 125 parking spaces.
I understand that. I'm just wondering still whether it would be a useful informative to have this investigated, because what we don't want is motorcyclists, and I've got nothing against motorcyclists, but finding they can't, there are an inadequate number of motorcyclist spaces and then taking up car park spaces.
Okay, well, tell you what, Malcolm, sorry, Andrew, while we go through the rest of the speakers, would you just think up a couple of lines suggested or formative that would satisfy you with this? And we'll review that at the end, okay?
Certainly, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Simon, sorry, it's Connor here. Could I add, there's actually plenty of space within the site that can accommodate motorcyclists. Obviously, it's a bit more problematic for cars, but there is plenty of space within the site for motorcyclists. Maybe not specific spaces.
Right, okay. All right.
If that's the case, then we don't need informative, so.
Okay. All right, we'll drop that then. And thank you for that contribution, Connor. That's clarified it. Okay, Malcolm, we've already covered because you were the ward member. And finally, Rochelle.
No affordable housing, obviously, but hopefully there's some affordable memberships for the tennis club. But yes, I support this.
Okay, well, I'm pleased to say that I've seen there's no dissent on this. So we're just going to go to the and Andrew's happy that we don't need an informative because Conor Corrigan has confirmed there's lots of, shall we call it, irregular space within the area that is not sufficient for car parking spaces that could accommodate mopeds or motorbikes. So I think that's probably a satisfactory way forward. I think on that basis, then I'm going to go straight to the recommendation for 200985 and ask people through raising the hand facility to show whether they support this application. Thank you.
And that is 8 members, Simon.
That's 8 members. So somebody didn't vote.
Oh no, there we go. We've got 9 now.
We've got 9. Okay, so that was a unanimous decision. Thank you, members, and thank you, Sophie and Connor.
Thank you.
And now it's on the last application, which we can get there, is on page 185, and this relates to the spin bar. Now, some members of the planning committee will remember that we have previously discussed this application and granted some permission associated with it, but we're now looking to broaden the potential categories of use of the site. And there have been some comments about the hours of operation, but I would draw members' attention to the fact that the current permission, correct me if I'm wrong, allows the site to operate for its intended nightclub purpose until either 3 or 3:30 in the morning. But perhaps Natalie, welcome. Perhaps you'd just confirm that as part of your summary, please.
Okay, good evening. This is application 201050 and what was spin at Alexandra House, Alexandra Court in Wokingham. The application is for a full application for change of use of a nightclub on the ground floor to a flexible mixed use comprising A1, which is retail, A2, which is financial and professional services, A3, which is cafes and restaurants, A4, drinking establishments, and or A5, which is hot food takeaways, and B1A, office space, plus changes to fenestration at ground floor. This is part retrospective due to shop fronts already being installed, and I'll refer later to this in the planning history. The application is before committee as the application is made by Woking Borough Council and there is an increase in staff. Here's the site location plan outlined in red. As you see, the application site is located in Wokingham Town Centre, to the west of Denmark Street and to the south of Alexandra Court, opposite the Gig House, and to the north and east of the Elmsfield development. Alexandra House used to contain spin bar and nightclub, as shown on the floor plans here, and offices on the upper floors. Here's some photos from 2019. Councillors may recall an application at Planning Committee in May 2019, which granted permission for change of use of the ground floor from spin and nightclub to mixed use comprising A1 retail and business B1A office space, plus changes to fenestration. A copy of the approved proposed floor plans is shown. This shows the ground floor for office accommodation with 4 A1 units with new shop fronts. As you'll see from the more recent photos, those new shop fronts have been installed and they were given permission in that May 2019, but they're also being applied for under this current application as well. This is the proposed floor plans within the current application, and if you compare the two, you'll see that they are the same, because this application relates to mainly to the use of those 4 units. We've also got the existing elevations, the approved proposed elevations, which you'll see introduces those new shop fronts, which we've seen in the photographs, and the proposed elevations, again, showing those changes to those shop fronts. The application would see the ground floor occupied by 264 square metres of office space at the rear and 4 units between 46 and 47 square metres. The application seeks for a flexible use of the units in A1, A2, A3, A4 or A5 use. Paragraph 5 of the committee report on page 192 explains the dual provision within the general permitted development order, whereby planning permission for uses that can be used flexibly and interchanged over a 10-year period, and whatever use is in operation at the end of the 10-year period becomes the established lawful use. The proposed uses are considered to be acceptable given the site's town centre location. The application is recommended for approval subject to conditions. And just going back on the point raised by the chair, you'll read in the planning history section about how the most recent use of the building by Spin had permission to be used till 3:30 in the morning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Natalie. So members, this proposal does not involve any physical changes to the external building. It doesn't involve any increase in floor areas.
It does include the shop fronts. It is included, but it's part of the planning history that's got permission as well.
They have already got permission. So what I'm saying is the amount of space isn't actually increased in terms of floor area or commercial area. To a large extent, what is really being done here is the council is seeking greater flexibility to ensure that the building is fully utilised, and obviously the council should glean the appropriate income from it in order to provide other services across the council. So this is a Westcott Ward application, so we don't have a Westcott Ward councillor. So I'm going to take this through the conventional order, which this time is in reverse. So we'll go to Rochelle Shepherd-Debay first. Rochelle.
Is there a cycle store for storing cycles for not the residents, but for the workers? And where will they park if they're parking?
There isn't any on-site parking provision, and that's dealt with within the committee report. And there isn't any cycle. The upper 2 floors were already in use as office accommodation. This proposal just relates to the rear part of that ground floor being used for office accommodation.
It just would be nice to have some place for somebody to leave their cycle safely if they're cycling into work, since that is what we're supposed to be doing now instead of driving.
I accept that, Rochelle, but that isn't part of it, doesn't form part of this proposal. And of course, it didn't form part of the proposal that we approved back in July, which was pretty well identical.
Yes, but an informative, encouraging them to find some place to put cycles would be nice.
Happy to suggest that. Yeah, that sounds sensible. Okay. Moving on, Malcolm Richards.
Thank you, Chairman. This change is in an area where it's as you say, it's already there and it's not changing the footprint at all. It says there'll be increased staff numbers, so that'll be possibly 10 extra people. So that's good for employment in the town centre. It doesn't have any parking, but it doesn't really need it because there's a car park on the other side of the road in Denmark Street. And so it's near other parking. I'm interested to know, looking back, there's an application that was approved in October last year for a new boiler room at the back. Has that boiler room been added, or is that still an outstanding application that they can still do?
I don't know off the top of my head whether that's been implemented.
Right, and it won't affect this anyway, presumably.
Because that's at the rear of the building.
Yes, so it won't affect it. Okay. Do we know if there are any solar panels on the roofs or around the area to provide the power for this more efficiently? I couldn't find any mention of solar panels anywhere.
I'm not aware of anything, no.
Is that something we could add as a comment, Chairman, that would be desirable?
Informative?
Informative.
Malcolm, whilst I agree it would be desirable, we have to remember this application is about change of use, not about constructing new buildings where we could ask people to incorporate it into the roofs.
Okay, that's true. So finally, the other question then is about the night hours. What happens about the hours that it already has till whatever it is, 3:30 in the morning? Do they get overtaken by this new arrangement, or do they carry on for some part of the building?
Do you want me to come back on that point?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
So when the new use of those units is implemented, then it would need to be in accordance with the condition that is proposed attached to this permission, because that nightclub use would no longer exist.
Right, so it just lapses in, presumably, if there isn't a nightclub there. It doesn't apply elsewhere or hang loose somewhere, it just disappears.
No, that hours condition applies to the nightclub use, whereas we would be granting a new permission for use of the units in those A classes that I've described, and there would be a condition which is set out in the report relating to hours of use of those for the A3, A4 and A5, were they to be occupied by those uses.
That's fine. Overall, I think it's quite a good idea. It's a more flexible arrangement and potentially more employment, so I approve of this.
Okay, thank you. Andrew Mickleborough.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There's no question that expanding the range of A1 uses would be a very sound move and bring benefits. The key issue seems to be whether expanding the range of A1 uses might have any detrimental impacts, and if so, whether these could be mitigated through conditions. I believe that the conditions that are included in our pack are sufficient to do that. And for that reason, I'll be supporting the application, and I have no questions of the officers.
Thank you, Andrew. Abdul Lois.
Thank you, Chairman. My only concern is when you let out those properties, would the owners have a parking facility for the staff and the owner of those units?
No, there's no on-site parking, but that was dealt with within the officer report. It's similar to other town centre units which don't have on-site provision.
Right,
I mean, obviously, Abdul, there's a significant amount of town centre parking in the area around the town, which is much the same as for anybody else working in offices in the town centre. There's facilities available either close by or further at distance, and I think that parking is generally most of it is available for all-day parking if people need to do so.
All right, thank you, Chairman, for your update.
All right, okay, Pauline Jorgensen.
I'm fully in support of this.
Thank you. Carl Duran.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm pretty much fully in support. I remember the previous application, and this is completely identical, isn't it? Apart from slight changes to different A classes. My only possible worry is if we ended up with 4 bars in a row opposite the gig house, but I suspect that's a very unlikely thing and a matter for licensing anyway. So yes, I approve.
Okay, thank you. And Stephen Conway.
There's very little I need to add. I'm very pleased that this new provision for the flexible mixed use is now available to us, because I think this will make a difference, and I'm in support of this application.
Thank you. And finally, Chris Baring.
Yes, like the last one, I don't believe there are any planning reasons to refuse, so I shall be voting to approve.
Okay. So I think we've rattled through that. It doesn't seem very controversial. I'm not even going to ask for alternative proposals because I think you've all made broadly positive indications. But for the record, could people please indicate by a show of
Sorry,
hands
Simon.
whether sorry, did you want to add about the comments? Sorry.
Well, no, it was there are no comments. It was just that are we including the informative that Rochelle had proposed about the to look for cycle storage, Rochelle?
My apologies.
Yes, please.
Can I suggest a simple informative then along the lines that the planning committee asks that the borough council should try and encourage cycling by providing some on-site storage facilities for cycles, secure on-site storage facilities for cycles. That is a request to them, of course, rather than an instruction. Would members be happy to support that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Yes.
Yes.
Would that require planning permission?
Well, being that unless it can be incorporated in a rear yard where they might store bins or something, it may even be able to be incorporated in, an entry part of the building without causing obstruction. But we're purely asking as a request that they consider that. That is really not our place to try and actually define it for them. Okay, so I'm now going to put the recommendation of 201050, which is for approval. Could members please indicate by a show of hands that they support this?
And we've got 7.
Anyone not?
Who've been Abdul and Andrew.
8.
Andrew,
One more.
It's just waiting on you, Abdul. Abdul, are you in support?
Abdul, can you hear us? Okay, well, Abdul, have you lost your silly answer probably, but can you hear us, Abdul?
Yes, I can.
Okay, do you support the application?
Yes, I do.
Right, okay, so that is unanimous. Thank you for your perseverance on that. So that concludes the main part of the agenda. I would draw members' attention to the members' update, which looks at recent appeal decisions. And I think we've been successful in all bar one, where we were partially successful. Obviously, occasionally planning inspectors come out with a slightly convoluted split decision. But whilst it's good to see the planning inspector backing the council's decision on most occasions, I think that that's quite a good percentage. Many councils have a higher rejection rate of appeals, so I think we're looking quite good on that. And then also you will see the updated information regarding enforcement, and you'll see that whilst new enforcement matters have been considered, others have been dispatched, but overall there's a slight net increase in the number of current enforcement matters that the team is considering. That is a little more complicated, as I guess you'll be aware by. At the moment, it's difficult, if not impossible, for enforcement officers to visit premises to check on enforcement matters. So as things get relaxed, I guess they're going to be very busy addressing some of these outstanding enforcement matters. Were there any matters on the members' update relating to enforcement or the appeal decisions that members wish to air or discuss?
No.
Okay. If not, I'm acutely aware of a variety of different views on how we move forward with the planning committee in terms of enabling all categories of people to attend and speak. And with that matter in hand, I have asked whether it will be possible for us to consider reverting to physical planning meetings from September in the chamber, where I understand they can accommodate in excess of 20 people with social distancing fully applied. I would be interested to know informally at this stage of members' views on that.
Hooray.
Okay, sorry, What I suggest I do is I end the formal part of the meeting and draw the planning committee as convened to a close, and end the public element of it, and then we can have an informal discussion on moving forward. Is that possible, Callum? Okay, thank you.